We can start.
Still says we're in a practice session.
Yes, we don't open it up. We just record it.
Oh, okay, fine, sorry.
No
Okay.
problem.
Good evening and welcome to the first in a series of fiscal year 23 budget hearings hosted by the Boston School Committee and Superintendent Brennan Consilius. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I will ask all of my colleagues to unmute and join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
and to the republic
under
for which
God,
it stands, one nation,
indivisible,
under God,
with liberty
with
and
liberty
justice.
and
and
justice
justice
for all.
for all.
Thank you. Because this is a remote meeting, I will ask Ms. Sullivan to please call the roll.
Dr. Alkins,
Present.
Mr. Cardet Hernandez, I think you're muted.
We couldn't hear you, Mr.
Present.
Thank you.
Cardet
Ms. Lopera,
Hernandez.
Ms. Mercer, Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Present.
Mr. Tran,
Present.
Mr. O'Neill, Ms. Robinson.
Present.
Thank you. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion for the school committee to adjourn to executive session for the purpose of conducting a strategy session related to collective bargaining with the Boston Teachers Union. To have this discussion in an open meeting could have a detrimental effect on the committee's bargaining position. The committee will return to public session at 6 p.m. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cardet Hernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Lopera,
yes.
thank you. Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill, Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. At this time, I'll ask my fellow members, the superintendent and staff to log off from this public session and join the executive session using the Zoom link sent out by Ms. Sullivan. We'll see you in a moment.
We're live.
Right. Good evening, everyone. The committee just returned from an executive session for the purpose of conducting a strategy session related to the collective bargaining with the Boston Teachers Union. Tonight's session is being shared live on Zoom. It will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and on YouTube. Tonight's meeting documents are posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicsschools.org/school committee, under the February 10th hearing link. The agenda, presentation, and budget documents have been translated in all of the major BPS language. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they are finalized. The committee is pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo-Verdiano, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. After the interpreters finish introducing themselves and providing Zoom instructions, we will activate the interpretation icon, the globe, at the bottom of your screen. Select the icon to select your language preference. Will our Spanish interpreters please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Espanol?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan Bernal. I am one of the 3 Spanish-speaking interpreters assigned for this meeting today. Muy buenas noches para todos. Bienvenidos. Mi nombre es Juan Bernal. Para accesar el servicio de la interpretación, busquen el globo redondo que aparece en la parte inferior derecha de sus pantallas y seleccionen español como su idioma de preferencia. De igual manera, si se están conectando de un iPad, de un iPhone o de un teléfono celular, pueden seleccionar los 3 puntos en la parte superior de sus pantallas donde dice Language Interpretation. Seleccionan español como su idioma de preferencia. Thank you very much. The next interpreter may proceed.
Oh, thank you. We're just going to have one person introduce themselves tonight. So I'm going to move on to the Haitian Creole interpreter. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire. I'm Haitian Creole interpreter. C'est moi-même avec Nadège qui a assuré interprétation jeudi et que nous connaissons comment pour nous entrer dans le système. Ou à cliquer en bas écran là, ou à choisir créole, ou à poser question, participer, pas oublier. Nous l'avons, on a traduit tout le bagage pour vous. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Will our Cabo Verdeano interpreter please introduce yourself and give Zoom instructions in Cabo Verdeano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Boa tarde, meu nome é Josiane, juntamente com Armando, nos sabem ser meus intérpretes simultâneos de crioulo. Para ter acesso à interpretação na crioulo, nos clica na ícone de globo na parte inferior do ecrã e seleciona Cabo Verdeano. Se você usa telemóvel, clica na 3 pontinhos na parte superior, interpretação e seleciona Cabo Verdeano. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Will our Cantonese interpreter please introduce yourself and give Zoom instructions in Cantonese?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 大家好，今晚咧我同 Anna 咧會為大家提供廣東話嘅同聲傳譯。咁一陣間請大家點擊屏幕下邊嘅地球儀啦，選擇 Cantonese 呢個頻道。如果你用手機或者平板電腦上網咧，請你係選擇屏幕下方嘅3個點，寫住更多進入語言服務，亦都係揀 Cantonese 嘅。一陣間見啦。Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Will our Mandarin interpreter please introduce yourself and give Zoom instructions in Mandarin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 大家好，我是 Tina， 我和我的搭档李伟会为您提供普通话同声传译翻译。一会儿您在他们开启了翻译的功能之后，如果你是用电脑上线的，请点击地球仪图标选择普通话；如果是用平板或者是手机上线，请点击3个点选择普通话。祝您今晚过得愉快。Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Will our Vietnamese interpreter please introduce yourself and give Zoom instructions in Vietnamese?
Good evening, everyone. My name is V. I will be your Vietnamese interpreter for tonight's meeting. I'm also doing it with Yuen, another interpreter. Kính chào quý vị. Tôi tên là Vi. Tôi và chị Duyên sẽ là thông dịch viên của quý vị vào buổi tối ngày hôm nay. Xin quý vị nhìn vào màn hình và tìm quả cầu. Khi tìm vào quả cầu thì bấm vào đó để có thể tìm tiếng Việt, để có thể nghe được thông dịch viên cung cấp thông dịch lại cho quý vị hiểu. Cảm ơn rất nhiều. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have 3 ASL interpreters, Cindy Ramos, Dr. Luana Clark, and Sharon Mendez, who will join us later. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. And thank you to you, all of the BPS staff behind the scenes who also provide support for our virtual meetings to run smoothly. We will now activate the interpretation icon and the closed captioning feature at the bottom of your screens. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you to everyone who signed up for public comment. Sign up for public comment closed today at 4:30 p.m. Please make sure that you are signed into Zoom under the same name you used to sign up for public comment. You can use the Zoom tools to rename yourself so that committee staff will be able to recognize you when it comes time to call on you. Thank you for your cooperation. Before we get started, I'd like to say a few words about our superintendent, Brenda Casalias, who was announced this week that she will be transitioning out of her role at the end of the school year. When she arrived in Boston in 2019, Dr. Casalias hit the ground listening, holding community listening sessions across the city, and visiting each and every Boston public school. Since that time, she has been relentless in her focus on equity, never wavering in her commitment to our students and families. Dr. Casalias has championed equity and excellence through implementing Mass Core graduation requirements, updating and adopting the exam school admission policy, adopting a new privacy and data sharing policy, updating the code of conduct, expanding dual language and ethnic study programs, launching district-wide and school-based equity roundtables, implementing accountability practices to hire a diverse workforce, implementing the racial equity planning tool as a framework for adopting and revising policies, expanding technology and access, and increasing mental health supports for students. And the list goes on. I'll be forever grateful to Dr. Casalius for leading our district through this pandemic. Despite unprecedented challenges, she has put us on a path towards providing all BPS students with equitable opportunities to achieve success in school and life. On behalf of the entire committee, I want to thank Dr. Superintendent Casalius for her tireless dedication to Boston youths and our city. Boston owes you a tremendous debt of gratitude for your transformational leadership and service on behalf of the city's children. Superintendent, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been my honor to serve the children and families of Boston and to do so alongside this esteemed body, both past and present. I tell my colleagues all across the nation, I am so blessed to have such a supportive school committee, and not all of them can say that. So you all have been just tremendous and thoughtful. You listen to our community. You lean in and hold us accountable. You ask good questions. You have great ideas. And I just love this city. And I love the children here. You can see when I go visit them, my face just beams up. And I'm proud of the foundation that we've laid for the next superintendent to come in, particularly around equity. We didn't get to everything because of the pandemic in our strategic plan, but we got to a lot, as you stated in your comments. And no one person does that work by themselves. They are part of an entire team. And the Boston Public Schools team is amazing. The leadership team, the school leaders, our educators who show up every day, our school nurses and social workers and psychologists, our custodians, our food nutrition workers, our facilities team, our tech team, our central office team that supports our schools, our secretaries. Everybody had all hands on deck these past 2 years. And I know even before I got here, they were just getting it done for kids and living into our mission, which is making sure children get what they need. And I could never be more proud of this experience, and I wouldn't exchange it for anything. And I know that our children are better off. And because of the work that we've all been able to accomplish, because of the community and the families who told us what we should prioritize our work on. And I just feel very blessed to have been able to listen, learn, be challenged by some of our loyal critics, and just do my best each and every day. And so I will stay committed and am as committed as I was the day I put foot into this office. And I will ensure that we have a strong foundation for moving into the next chapter of Boston Public Schools under your next leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. At this time, I'd like to open it up to my fellow members for comments. Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Gracias, Madam Chair. Quiero decirle a la superintendente Brenda Casalius que recuerdo cuando a mí me nombraron para estar en el comité. Una de las primeras llamadas que recibí fue la de ella.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I do remember when I was selected as for being one of the members of the committee. In fact, one of the first phone calls that I did receive was your phone call.
Y me gustó mucho que ella trató de hablar español.
I appreciate the fact that you tried to speak Spanish.
Pero quiero decirle que le tocó un tiempo difícil la superintendencia que ella ha tenido, ha sido un tiempo de pandemia muy duro y sé que estar en sus zapatos no ha sido fácil.
I'd like to acknowledge as well that it's been very difficult times. This pandemic crisis, the crisis that we've been through, it's been a very challenging period of time. And I would like to acknowledge that being in your shoes is definitely not an easy endeavor and hasn't been.
Verla en una escuela cuando falta un maestro asistiendo y dando clases y siendo uno más, eso habla muy bien de ella y denota que es una persona con una humildad bien identificada.
The ability to see you going to school and being present when a teacher is absent and giving a class, it is something that is very comforting and something that is a reflection of your humility and commitment.
Ha impulsado cosas importantes que no voy, tal como decía nuestra presidenta, y yo pienso que eso debemos darle continuidad.
You have promoted critical things here, as Madam Chair elaborated, and I do believe that we have to provide continuity to all the projects that you had started.
Le deseo que esté más relax, que descanse cuando termine su periodo y valoro muchísimo de que ella ame tanto a esta ciudad de Boston. Sé que fue un tiempo difícil, un tiempo de críticas, un tiempo de no críticas, pero sé que hiciste el mayor esfuerzo.
So it is time to relax. It is time to look at different horizons. It is time to rest after you finish your period. I have to acknowledge that there were very difficult times. At the same time, I have to acknowledge that you did your absolute best.
Gracias por todo.
I am very grateful for everything, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. Mr. Tran.
Again, good evening, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my feeling and appreciation toward, to me, the best superintendent that I have worked with so far in my tenure and my lifetime, as a matter of fact. I'm very honored and privileged to have been working with you, partnering with you over the last 3 years. In fact, you know, even from the point of interviewing you and hiring you, I remember one of the questions that I posed to every candidate were the personal analysis and personal belief regarding equity. And your answer was one that struck me most, as a matter of fact. And the commitment you showed the first day of, on the first day of assuming your position was the 100-day spent visiting schools show to me how committed you are in ensuring the committee, I mean the community voice, the staff voice, and every personnel within the BPS are heard. That strikes an accord with me. For the past 3 years, I have consistently rated you exceed in, if not all, but most of the categories that we are charged with evaluating you. Some of the areas that were of certain concern to my fellow committee members, such as staff transition, personnel decisions, school administrative, school, what's the word? For lack of better term, I'll refer to principals, dealing with principals and things of that nature. To me, as a former, I'm retired now, but as a former administrator of a large department, are non-issues, because that's the nature of the beast. We deal with it every day as a manager when we are trying to run a tight ship in ensuring the effectiveness, the efficacy of an agency. Staff transitions, of course, happen. Issues arising from internal staff, of course, happen. I believe that you had handled them beyond my expectation anyway. I like to say a lot, but the problem is, we have other members who are waiting for their turn. So I like to say that to end up by saying this: whatever your endeavor in your future, please bring with you your enthusiasm, your commitment, and most of all, your concern for children in education with you. And keep in touch, please. I like to follow your path. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Tran. Ms. LaPera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Superintendent Casilius, I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you, to say gracias. I too, the first call I received after my appointment was also from you, much like Member Polanco Garcia. And I just think it's important to state that being a leader of color, and especially a woman of color, is difficult in any capacity. And in the superintendency, it's probably one of the most difficult jobs because there's so much at stake when we think about how it truly impacts the daily lives of our little ones. I really appreciate the work that you were able to do in your time in these crazy times. And I think it's important to state that you were able to bring about change in partnership with our community that many others were unable to touch historically. So thank you. I'm very much looking forward to continuing to work together in the upcoming months. And to my committee members and to those in the community, I just want to recognize that the work ahead is going to continue to be challenging. But I think working together and identifying, selecting, and most importantly, supporting a new leader is our charge. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more comments before we move on? If not, I want to say thank you all. And I think we all agree that we need to finish this school year strong. We have set ambitions goals for BPS and will continue to drive them forward towards together in the following months. The school committee will have more to share on the process to identify a new leader for BPS at our next regular meeting on February 15th. We look forward to sharing more information at that time. Thank you. We'll now move on to the focus of tonight's business, the fiscal 23 budget proposal. At this time, I'd like to invite Chief Financial Officer Nate Cooter and Deputy Chief Financial Officer David Bloom to provide us with a fiscal year 23 budget overview with a focus on school budgets. First, I would like to invite Superintendent Casilius to give opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you for your warm thank yous earlier to my leadership. And like I said, No one person does this work alone. They come with a whole team, and I'm really excited about the finance team and what they were able to do. I hope that my time and tenure in Boston Public Schools will not be judged by the time I had in the seat, but by the impact that we have made. And the impact is great when it comes to our budget. And I am most proud of the pieces we've been able to accomplish in creating the quality guarantee. To reiterate the budget process, as I mentioned during the last school committee meeting, the BPS finance team has worked diligently with me. They've worked with the whole executive team and our partners at the city to present a budget that prioritizes our students, promotes excellence and equity, and makes good on our plan to return strong, recover well, and reimagine education in an ever-changing and uncertain world. The fiscal year 2023 budget includes an increase of $40 million from our current budget, resulting in a total of little more than about $1.3 billion for our school district. This budget builds on the last 2 years of increases that go directly to our students and especially prioritize those in need. We must continue to invest in academic recovery for our students and schools to continue our efforts to recover strongly from the pandemic and make up for any learning loss. This budget builds on our quality guarantee, our promise, and which is guaranteeing it will grow to include student and family supports, rigorous curriculum and academics, 21st century facilities, and many enrichment opportunities for all our students. We launched our investment in student and family supports with the allocation of a full-time nurse at every school in school year 20. We built on this foundation in school year 21 as we returned to in-person learning with the addition of family liaisons so that we could cultivate trust and provide needed support to our families. And we added at least one full-time social worker at every school to support the social emotional needs of students. And in this proposed budget, we will add counselors at the pre-K to grade 12 level at all grades and clinical psychologists. Students and teachers alike have shared that we must make it a priority that we focus on our classrooms, on the health and well-being of students and staff within our school communities. That has to be first. And I know that a budget is a reflection of our values, and this one makes me proud. While the ever-evolving pandemic continues to challenge us, it has also spurred enormous creativity and innovation in the way we think about our students' needs and the way we do our work together. We believe that these new positions will round out the network of support that our principals and our teachers have been asking for. These student support teams will ensure that students don't fall through the cracks. Our goal is to create high quality, rigorous, ethnically and culturally responsive curriculum and instruction that is robust and leads to strong academic pathways. We are working with school leaders during this budget season to deliver on access to our Mass Core and to access more counselors, particularly at the 9th grade level, which we've lowered the ratio in order to give the right amount of support needed after this pandemic and to reach our new higher graduation standards. We've also added more physical education, art, music, world language, and academic enrichment within our secondary student schedules. I'm especially proud of this work to standardize the graduation requirements across all high schools and set the bar high with the needed support so that we can strive toward our strategic goals of accelerating learning and an equitable opportunity for all our students. Our FY23 budget will continue to invest in facility repairs through our operating budget, and it will make critical investments in new facilities through our capital budget. Our quality guarantee will bring more gyms, libraries, and auditoriums where they don't already exist. That's more physical fitness, more focus on literacy, and more singing and acting within our schools. Through new buildings, we add critical spaces that are missing from our existing facilities like nursing, counseling, sensory and therapeutic spaces, and outdoor learning, outdoor play gardens, and play spaces. We are laying the groundwork for these investments, but recognize it takes many years and sustained focus to achieve the results our students deserve. The final area of our quality guarantee is extended learning and enrichment in our operating budget. And we're going to expand access to quality library collections. As we expand our high school redesign, we will continue to invest in athletics at the elementary level and at the middle and high school level as well. And we know that stability matters for our students. So this budget prioritizes that with 54.7 million in soft landings. Now that's not sustainable, but in a global pandemic, we believe that it's necessary. I will now turn it over to our school committee members for remarks, and then you will hear from our Chief Financial Officer, Nate Cooter, who will present the F23 budget proposal focused on school-based investments. Madam Chair.
Thank you. So the committee can make remarks now, or should we wait till after the presentation?
You can, why don't we?
If people are ready now, we can take.
Yeah, because we did the remarks earlier, I think, and then we'll.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Alkins? No? Does anyone have any remarks or questions at the moment? No. I think we'll wait till after the presentation, Dr. Caselius.
Perfect.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Nate.
Excellent, and thank you, Chairwoman Robinson. Good evening, members of the school committee. I certainly can't frame the budget any better than the superintendent just did. And I am excited to be here to present the FY23 budget on behalf of the Boston Public Schools. As the superintendent mentioned, this budget, supported by continued investment from the city and Mayor Wu, allows us to continue to invest in our children and raise the quality across all of our schools. Totaling over 1.3 billion, our FY23 proposal represents significant resources and opportunities for our students. As the chairwoman mentioned, tonight's budget is focused on school budgets and will include a discussion of the big picture. The new investments we're making to implement a quality guarantee at every school, and a look at the broader challenges facing our district that impact individual schools. But it is also an opportunity for us to share with the community exactly how our school budgets are built, how we allocate funds, and how much we differentiate funding based on student needs. BPS has an incredibly progressive, student-centered funding system that's a model for all other districts throughout the country. I'm once again starting my presentation with this quote from the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Policy. It's the starting point for all of our planning and therefore a starting point for tonight's presentation. The fiscal year 23 budget for the Boston Public Schools is guided by the belief that every child in every classroom, in every school, deserves the same, and for some historically underserved students, even greater opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. At the start of our planning and at our prior hearing, I talked about the conversation we had with you as a school committee in December 2020 at a retreat. And it was from this conversation and the recognition that the pandemic was having a disproportionate impact on our most vulnerable and historically marginalized students that the Return, Recover, and Reimagine framework emerged. At that time, I thought of these as 3 phases that would operate in succession in sort of chronological order. But what I realize now is that this is not linear, that we're moving between phases in iterations. And as we continue to use this framework for the FY23 budget, we'll continue to think about all 3 phases of our work. With that, I want to introduce Farah Asaraj, Deputy Chief Academic Officer, who will discuss some of the key data that inform the development of this year's budget.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nate, and to our school committee and to Dr. Caselius. We thank you for your service, and we are honored to be of service. And this commitment with you has brought us here to these commitments, in addition to the vision that you have laid out in your tenure. So in order to respond to the data, which we have seen across the years prior to COVID and during COVID, it demonstrates again and again that we have areas of problems in addition to problems of practice that we have to account for with our investments. And we are only as strong as our outcomes for our most marginalized historically and presently students who are of service in terms of English learners, students with disabilities, those who are most marginalized in our district over the course of years. And as we sort of set out the framework in our 3 problems, we want to ensure that it is one FY23 is one school year ahead of us, but that this is a long-term charge and that we have to account for the services and priorities to continue to make progress towards our Mass Core participation, our academic outcomes for, again, our students who are most marginalized, students with disabilities, our Black and Brown students, students who are multilingual, and again, those with intersectionality and dual identifications with services and needs. And in particular, we want to really amplify our superintendent's quality guarantee measures as we set forth a vision in making sure that every student, not one, not some, not few, but that every student has a full set of access to the quality guarantees. So tonight you will hear from us in the connection to each of these problems, the investments that have been linked and attached to making progress towards these problems. And we'll move into the next slide and look into the Mass Core implementation. This has been adopted by our school committee, as we know that this is a statewide initiative. And towards our adoption, the data outcomes from our assessment has indicated only 37% of last year's graduating class has met all of Mass Core requirements. Now, again, we know that COVID has had an impact. Certainly there are pathways in which we are supporting our schools and school leaders to be able to disaggregate courses, as well as identifying particularly students with disabilities and English learner courses to be able to meet the graduation requirements. So while those gaps persist, that is our effort towards ensuring that we support all high schools and all programming, and that we are investing the $6.2 million to do just that. In addition, $3.2 million will move towards additional support for 9th grade guidance counselors, as the superintendent mentioned. We'll move into the next slide, which is our problem 2. And I think, as we all know, we could certainly expand our problems. And this is for FY23, the more strategic problems and investments that we have identified. And academic outcomes for students, especially for those, again, in most need, as well as those with intersectionality of identities and variety of abilities. And multilingual learners have traditionally underperformed in our MCAS performance, which is our statewide measure for accountability. And in comparison to subgroups of all of students, and in particular for students with disabilities, English learners, those again who are dually identified, Black and in particular Latinx students are lower performing than that in comparison of their white and Asian peers. This has been exacerbated by COVID, in addition to the lack of data or continuum of MCAS assessment to really be able to measure comparatively, as there has been a shift in the way in which MCAS has been assessed in this past year. However, our MAP assessment is our interim informative assessment checks indicates that our students continue to demonstrate lacking of grade level standards and content in both reading ELA as well as mathematics. In addition to that, the lack of continued learning, as well as impact on COVID, health disparities, has really helped, especially in COVID, has really impacted our Latino, Latinx communities, our Black communities, our immigrant communities, and in which case we have seen a significant, or at least a significant enough percentage of a decrease of our attendance. And therefore, the attendance of our students has decreased at 3% last year. And based on this year's data, we are seeing that that is a trajectory in which there are more students who are missing in school learning, which it therefore will obviously impact their outcomes and learning in terms of their grade level standards. So what do we need to do differently? Well, there are a few investments here that we've laid out. One, which is again, the bilingual supports and native language programming, so that we have identified the increasing native access as well as instruction with biliteracy for multilingual learners to achieve a seal of biliteracy in addition to bicultural and bilingual assets. So $5 million is the FY23. There are again, future investments towards this. For our 10 million is to expand academic counseling for K-8, as the superintendent has mentioned. This is in addition to the high school investments with our 9th grade students. This 6.7 million is to reimagine the schools, practices, and structures for students with disabilities. We know that our students with disabilities have a great need in terms of environment, facilities, as well as instruction and programming in the most inclusive settings. 5.9 million will be invested in equitable literacy. This is our district-wide initiative, so equitable literacy and biliteracy for our bilingual students and multilingual learners. And our problem 3, we do not currently provide all of our students the full set of quality guarantees. And this is our greatest inequity. And in every school, every child and student should have high quality, ethnically and culturally responsive curriculum, instruction, and career pathways. Enrichment, so access to arts, sports, student government, and all of the ways in which we're engaging our students within our school community, as well as outside in their own communities with experiential learning and before and after school. Facilities. We know that part of the learning, and this is attached to the Common Core implementation, the Mass Core implementation, in alignment with what we need to envision with Mass standards and frameworks that is aligned to the Common Core, that in the facilities, our 21st century buildings are a must for students to access science labs, technology, libraries, gymnasium, and really the plethora of all that they should experience in order to facilitate their learning and deepen their understanding and knowledge and grow. Student and family supports, the resources for families so our students, families, and communities can thrive. We cannot accept that our families and students are struggling, and we certainly cannot measure outcomes because of survival. So we have to measure and push towards all of our students and families equitably, systemically and equitably thriving towards their success. In order to do that, the investments that have been laid out by the superintendent is a 7.8 million for expanded access to libraries. This is only inclusive of libraries, it is inclusive of enabling texts, multicultural texts, texts that really connect in stories and narratives that connect to their students, identities, families, and communities. And that also includes bilingual texts as well. And it's 7.2 million to expand social emotional supports. This is really important in the work that we are doing in the MTSS framework, as well as across the district, to ensure that SEL and supports for students, given what we have seen and continue to see as a disparity for students with their social emotional as well as behavioral needs. And a 22.8 million investment in high quality facilities. Again, we must envision a future oriented facility for our students to be able to thrive and to experience and to experiment in all the ways in which they are engaging with their learning and to be able to expand that in their own communities and at their homes. So with this, we will move into more of dissecting each of these investments and how they really are laid out in terms of our school funding. And we'll move it over to Nate Cooter and my colleagues to move us through all of the information for this evening.
Thank you so much, Farah. As I transition to the next slide and think about the 3-year, $110 million that we've received from the city to be able to invest directly in our students. I just want to take a moment to just note that this is probably the one slide in the presentation that will most make me think of Superintendent Cassellius for years after her tenure ends. It's because when she came here several years ago, she told me that she had a vision for what she wanted for funding for her district, for her students, and what she wanted to be able to accomplish. I didn't honestly believe that we would get this level of funding and support from the city, but I followed her lead, and I'm glad that I did. And I forever will change the way I think about advocacy and how I think about what we need to do to make sure our students have what they need to be successful. Of course, it takes a commitment from the city in order for us to accomplish that. But without Superintendent Cassellius' vision and being bold enough to step forward and ask for what our students need, we wouldn't be in this position today. And so I just want to pause here and just say thank you. Of course, over this time, we've been dealing with significant enrollment declines. And if you've followed other news out of districts, in Time Magazine, there was an article about Oakland and the way that they're dealing with declining enrollment, making significant changes abruptly to school communities, closures and mergers. Instead, here in Boston, we are continuing to invest in our schools, continuing to invest in our communities while we have the difficult conversations and do the strategic planning about, first, how do we get the resources our students need to our students, while we as a district figure out the best way to deliver those services and the right portfolio across the district. Of course, we're able to have this significant conversation, a significant level of investment because of the commitment from commitment of funding that we've received. With that, I want to talk about the first focus of our budget, which is the work to return strong. I mentioned, of course, that it's unfortunately the case that we are continuing to experience enrollment declines across all of our schools. This is largely due to broader demographic trends. There are fewer students living in Boston and entering our school district as the birth rate declines and the cost of living continues to rise. Our plan and our budget is to continue to support to these schools through this period of instability. As the superintendent mentioned, this is only a short-term solution, and we need to make bigger system-wide changes, but it's simply not possible for us to do it on a respectful timeline for the next school year. This chart demonstrates that we have had a decline of roughly 4,800 students in the elementary grades over the last 5 years. This level of decline is, of course, significant because our current enrollment is the most important factor in estimating how many students we anticipate serving in future years. In particular, our entry grades, K0, K1, and K2. Those grades serving 3, 4, and 5-year-olds represent our best opportunity to grow enrollment and keep families in the city. And if we don't enroll students in those early grades, we often don't see them enroll in BPS throughout the length of that cohort's time in BPS. So what we may be facing as a result of this declining enrollment is multiple years of adjusting schools and dealing with enrollment declines as those cohorts age through the system. These enrollment trends matter for budgeting in large part because of the weighted student funding model, which is the way the majority of our funds in BPS are allocated to schools. Weighted student funding is also known as student-based budgeting or fair student budgeting or student-centered funding. It has become a popular funding model for districts with complex and changing student demographics who seek to allocate resources in an equitable and transparent way. It supports schools in being able to build their budgets to best meet the unique needs of their students instead of allocating specific staff or resources directly to schools, the model allocates dollars that are tied to students. Students get specific weights that are differentiated based on student characteristics. That means, in its simplest form, that the dollars follow the students and that more dollars go to our highest needs students. The dollar amount per pupil gets multiplied by the number of students we are expecting to attend a particular school, and then it's translated into a total allocation a school receives in their budget. So rather than starting with services or staffing, we are starting by gaining an understanding of who the students are that we're serving and what their unique needs are. As school enrollment and student makeup and needs change for a given school, funding levels change correspondingly. Weighted student funding, or WSF, as I will probably slip in to say throughout the evening, is structured to fund schools based on 8 student categories listed here. Students at each grade level get a basic level per pupil allocation, which you can see in the first row of this table. You'll then see that students identified in different categories get allocations that are added to their initial grade level allocation. Every student in the district starts out with the grade level weight or base funding amount. Weights are then additive, which means that a student with disabilities who's also coming from a low income household get their base allocation, the allocation for a student with disabilities, and then the allocation for students facing economic disadvantage. It's important to us that the categories listed here remain reflective of the ways that we want to ensure we are supporting our students. And we strive to regularly reevaluate and make adjustments to them in order to ensure this. While WSF captures the basic level of differentiation needed to move us towards equitable funding, we recognize that there are other factors, such as family choice and assignment, and overall enrollment trends, that must be accounted for outside of weighted student funding in order to ensure equitable access to educational opportunities across the district. This slide shows a breakdown of all funding sources we use to ensure that we are funding schools equitably and guaranteeing access to student supports. It includes weighted student funding, as well as a foundation for quality positions, the quality guarantee positions, and supplements. You'll note here that the first line, designated for weighted student funding, is showing a significant reduction from FY22 to FY23. This represents the cost of enrollment declines we discussed earlier. You'll also see, however, an increase in both the foundation for quality positions and the supplemental amounts, which are intended to offset this decline and invest additional resources in our schools. Also reflected here is the funding we provide on top of the foundation. We have a set of designated resources to turnaround and transformation schools that are targeted towards those schools. We have other allocations to schools running programs that have unique needs outside of what weighted student funding can do, such as vocational program and an inclusion support. We also have schools will receive funding, federal funding, through Title I, IDEA, which is funding for special education students. Those are grants, which provide additional support for students facing economic disadvantages and students in special education. ESSER funding, which are also allocated directly to schools in FY23, are not included in this slide, and represent additional funding directly to schools. Since FY20, as we've seen in enrollment declines, we've seen an increase in soft landings to help support schools. In particular, over the last 2 years, we have grown the amount of money that we've done to support schools facing enrollment declines. The superintendent mentioned $54 million in supports to schools. That represents a $49 million increase in soft landings since FY20. In addition, our quality guarantee has invested $44 million in additional staffing and resources directly to schools. The second focus in our budget and in our work is to recover well, to ensure that school communities have what they need to not only repair the damage done by COVID-19, but also create the conditions in which students and families can thrive. Our first priority in the area of recovery is to mitigate the impact of student enrollment declines on the student experience. Over the last 10 years, we've become caught in a difficult cycle of enrollment declines, leading to decreases in funding, which then lead to reductions in staffing and programs that families want, leading to less families picking the schools and declining enrollment, then leading to more decline in enrollment, and the cycle continues. These declines and the associated cuts have historically had a disproportionate impact on our Black and Latinx students, English learners, and students with disability. This year, we are making significant investments to stop this cycle. First, through the Hold Harmless, we are investing in temporarily breaking the connection between enrollment declines and funding decreases. And then to make sure that we not only stop the decline in programming, but invest additional resources that families want. We're investing additional in the quality guarantee. We've increased funding to new programs and supports that parents have said they expect at every school. As we did last year, we've invested additional financial support outside of weighted student funding. And we recognize that the disruption has been destabilizing for our students, and therefore we continue to ensure that major changes to school programs and offerings are not disrupted. Schools were asked to close classrooms and adjust teaching positions and para-provision positions that serve students on a per pupil basis. But we overall looked to make sure that there was a continuity of the programming and student experience to make sure that there was not a major change to what schools were offering to their students. One exciting new area in the superintendent's focus for the last few years has been in getting us to a place where we can invest in more libraries. This is, of course, critical for our equitable literacy focus as a district. And over the next few years, we'll be investing in new library staff to be able to support students and staff in terms of access to literacy. We'll be increasing the amount we spend on texts, and we'll be increasing the number of libraries and library resources that we have across our schools. I mentioned at our hearing last week, and I'll mention it again, this week is National School Counseling Week, which makes it the perfect time for us to recognize the contributions of school counselors across our district, but also announce the continued expansion of counselors. In FY20, as the superintendent mentioned, we expanded nursing services. FY21 and 22, student access to social workers and family liaisons was a focus. And this year we'll be adding school guidance counselors, academic counseling, and more school psychologists. This is a coordinated team of resources to be able to support all of our students in their learning plans, in their growth, to make sure that they are able to access the rigorous curriculum that the academic team is putting in place. The third focus of our budget and in our work is to reimagine education in an ever-changing world. Superintendent Cassellius and the high school team presented this at the January 26th school committee hearing. And this is the quality guarantee across 4 major domains: academics, enrichment, facilities, and student and family supports. What I wanted to do for each of these key areas is try and highlight what already existed within our budget going into FY23, and then try and highlight, per your request, some of the ways in which the student experience will be changing and see how this will impact individual schools. When it comes to our academic quality guarantee, some of the budget basics are that the weighted student funding foundation, when you look at our weighted student funding template, you see that every school has funding, regardless of size, for a secretary, a school leader, and some basic school supplies. Also through weighted student funding, through the differentiated support, we provide low class sizes across our district. In all areas, our district meets or exceeds the class size minimums, or I should say is below the class size maximums throughout the state. We have smaller class sizes than most other districts throughout the state. We also have some standard equity-based allocations, including language acquisition team, a coordinator of special education services, and the other supports about that wraparound care that the superintendent mentioned. And of course, we have not talked about this in a while, but the Office of Instructional Information Technology did a wonderful job of rolling out one-to-one computing on a rapid basis at the start of this pandemic. That's something that we had originally a 3-year goal to achieve, and we accomplished it in much less time. Next year in FY23, students in 9th grade are going to see more opportunities for mass core courses in all of our high schools. There's going to be additional high school guidance counselors to support them and provide planning for their course of learning throughout the 4 years in high school. We're also providing additional supports in bilingual and native language programming and special education programming, which Farah highlighted at the opening part of this presentation. In enrichment, as part of our expanding foundation of quality, or the quality guarantee, we did an effort to make sure that partnership funding, the funding that was associated with the rollout of the Opportunity Index several years ago, was not used to balance the school's budget if they had enrollment declines. That means that regardless of the size of your school or the enrollment that changes, schools have resources to invest in critical partnerships and opportunities for students across all schools. We also have student government, debate, and athletic opportunities across. In prior fiscal years, we invested in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math across all of our K-8 schools. Next year, we're going to be making additional investments in athletics and investing in establishing a standard of high quality arts equipment for all arts classrooms across the district. I believe that it's over 300 arts classrooms to make sure that our students have access to the resources they need. And of course, we're going to continue to expand and provide summer learning opportunities to all of our students who want and need that opportunity. Next focus of our quality guarantee is facilities, a critical issue that's often talked about and something that we've needed to address for decades. The first is the first investment that we had made in prior fiscal years is an increase in custodians, both daytime custodians and overtime night custodians in all of our schools. Indy Alvarez and the operations team have done critical work in air quality implementation, including a multi-year rollout of air conditioning to all of our schools. And then the kitchen and dining renovations that have expanded kitchens in schools that were previously satellite kitchens that were doing pre-plated meals in our schools. Something that has been very exciting rollout in the Cooter household. My children are attending a school that is getting their My Way Cafe, which is opening this month. And then in FY23, $3.4 million is going to increase maintenance and repair to catch up on some of the deferred maintenance that we have as a district. We're expecting to see schools immediately notice more repairs and better maintenance of our buildings. We're doing $1.7 million to expand capacity for our team to do major projects. What they're going to see is more shovels in the ground, as they say, more construction projects underway, because we have the staff to be able to support that implementation. And finally, the hub model, the family and community and student supports at our schools. A nurse in every school. We've engaged school site councils and parent councils throughout the process, implemented the racial equity planning tool, as Chairwoman Robinson noted at the start of her remarks. These are critical investments that we've made over the last few years. Next year, we've talked a lot about it, but it bears repeating, 26 new school psychologists, FTE, being able to meet the national standard of 1 school psychologist for every 500 students in the district. And then there will be 1.5 million in additional support to social workers and additional FTE for social workers as well. This is a lot of information. One of our goals as a finance team is to be able to provide transparency. And so we've provided a lot of information online for you to be able to download and dig into our budget. There's the Explore budget tool, which will be updated in the next few weeks to the FY23 data, but there's a lot of critical information about our budget that you can find already. All of the documents that I referenced tonight around weighted student funding and our full budget can be downloaded by going to our website, and all documents will be translated. I mentioned this slide last time as the one slide that you should familiarize yourself with if you're just coming on our budget for the first time. It breaks our budget down into 4 key areas that are important to understand. The first is direct school expenses, the focus of tonight's hearing. Those are the items that are budgeted directly in schools that you see when we do the allocations out to the Adams School or the Taylor. The second are school services budgeted centrally. Those are items that are technically managed by the central budget, but are actually found in schools. School custodians, OT and PT, special education service providers. Those are the things that we manage as a central office and pay for out of our budget, but are actually school-based resources. Then there's true central administration, the superintendent, the finance team, human capital, those resources needed to operate a school district. And then finally, non-BPS student services like transportation to charter schools, we provide to Boston residents who are in non-BPS schools. The purpose of this slide is not to test your eyesight, but to just show you the document that you can find online and get into more detail. It is an example of our WSF template that is available for all schools and for each individual school on our website. It shows a comparison of the current year WSF allocation to next year's proposed allocation. You'll see a breakdown of the number of students assigned in each WSF category, as well as the weight per pupil for allocating assigned to them, and then the totals in each category that the school receives. This is a helpful way to see how students at a particular school are funded and how the enrollment and funding associated with each group has changed for a particular school from year to year. However, this is not the complete picture of a school's funding. In particular, in a year where we're providing more funding outside of weighted student funding, this picture is one piece of the overall puzzle. The second larger document or higher, sort of bigger picture document for each individual school is the school allocation one-pager. This includes the total allocation to each school broken down by funding source. You'll see here that allocations that reflect on the table I talked about earlier, showing a breakdown of the different resources funding we provide to each school. This document is a good way for you to see the number of quality guarantee positions at a particular school and the other types of funding that a school receives outside of weighted student funding. And again, it allows you to do a comparison of year to year to know what has changed in a school's budget affecting their overall allocation. I'll close by noting that this is the second presentation on the schools on the overall district budget. We will be back in front of the school committee on Tuesday, March 1st for the central office budget hearing. We will focus on how our central office is organized to support schools and support students. There's another hearing on March 16th in which we'll focus on public comment and address questions from the school community, the school committee, before the school committee takes the vote on the budget on March 23rd. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Chairperson Robinson, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I just want to alert the committee, we usually do public comment after we have heard from, we'll do public comment first, and then we will have our opportunity to provide questions or remarks to the presentation. So with that, I want to turn it over to Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. We have 14 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to testify, and I'll remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. Those who require interpretation services will receive an additional 2 minutes. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Large groups addressing the same topic are encouraged to consolidate their remarks or choose a spokesperson to provide testimony. Written testimony is appreciated and encouraged. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom, and please make sure that you're signed into Zoom with the same name that you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. We'll begin this evening with our students, starting with Alfredo A.J. Barros, Brandon Michelle, Keisha Gideon, Janae Merville. Let's start there. Is Alfredo with us?
Okay.
Good evening.
Hi, my name is AJ and I'm a third grader at the PA Shaw, and I'm here because we needed 4th and 5th and 6th grade. At the Shaw, did you know that I got Student of the Month last month? It was for showing perseverance. The Shaw helped me do it because they put faith in me. At the Shaw, the teachers love me and I love them. If I have to go to a new school next year, I won't able to visit my old teachers. I visit old teachers because I miss them and love them. They teach me good things and help me if I need it. When I was in K1, Miss Stubby helped me make A5. Sometimes I go help the K2 students during their choice time. Miss Bouncy helped me do math, and I'm a good math person, and she helped me learn new things that I didn't know how to do. If I leave the Shaw, teachers might not remember me, and I want them to remember me. One time I met this kid, and his name was Jamar. We got to meet each other, and then we would always have fun together. We became best friends, and Andrew. This is a big memory that I don't want to forget. And I have been at the Shaw for almost my whole life. And if I leave, I might talk to them on the phone, but we might not be in the same school together. I don't know what the Shaw would do without me, and I don't know what I would do without the Shaw.
Thanks, AJ. Our next speaker is Brandon Michelle.
Hi, I'm Brandon, and I am a first grader at the PA Shaw. When I go to school, I feel like I'm at home. I love my teachers. I love my classroom community. I love my school. I am happy with who I am at the PA Shaw. When I began first grade, I did not know if I could learn to read and do math. I used to think I'm not doing good. Guess what? Now I am reading and doing math, and I know I am reading just like the other kids in my class. I do not want to stop being at the PA Shaw. I want a 4th, 5th, and 6th grade here so I can keep learning. My family picked the right school for me. I love my family and I love my school. I feel welcome here. Please don't take that away. I am a Black kid. My life and the lives of my friends matter. Please let us keep our school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Keisha Gideon. Keisha, if you'd like to speak, please accept the prompt. Okay, let's try Janae Merville. Okay, Janae's not signed into the meeting. So we're going to move on to our speakers who'll be using interpretation services. I'll now invite our interpreters to offer support to our next set of speakers. I will turn off the interpretation icon. Interpreters and the public will all be in the main room. Interpreters, please stop interpreting and mute yourself for this part of the testimony. School committee member Ms. Polanco Garcia will receive Spanish interpretation by phone when testimony is being presented in a language other than English or Spanish. Our next speaker is Marie Diaz. We'll be using Haitian Creole.
Hi.
Good evening.
Bonjour, Mary, comment est?
Moi, très bien.
Ok, c'est moi le Sergio, c'est moi qui traduit pour. Attendez.
Ok.
Si vous pas besoin de pas dire tout ça, dit m'a traduit, attendez.
Ok. Bonsoir, non, moi c'est Marie-Emilienne Deis.
Good evening, my name is Mary-Emilienne Deis.
Moi j'ai un petit moi qui dans PHA, non c'est Francesca, gentil.
I have my daughter that is in PHR. Her name is Francesca Gentil.
Je dis ça fait me parler parce que petite moi l'Elvine la calal toujours sad parce qu'elle dit que ça qu'il pas pral ouais ambini encore il a fermé l'école là ce qui vraiment perturbé petite là.
I decided to speak today because every time my daughter comes home, she feels so sad because they will close the school soon.
Parce que moi-même fait expérience avec Boston Public School déjà. Mon petit premier petit moi il va à high school l'autre année.
I have one of my children that will go to high school next year. I know everything. I know a lot about Boston Public School.
Expérience moi fait avec PHA, pas fait avec aucune l'école dans Boston qui Public School. Parce que petit film dans l'Elvin là qu'elle toujours dit moi ça que oh Mrs. professeur c'est maman, il considère comme si c'est maman pour accueillir les jeunes mais professeur dans l'école là.
PHR is a very good model for me. And my daughter told me she likes the school very much. They consider her like a real kid.
Yeah, parce que l'élève là qu'elle a toujours comme ça dit, oh Mrs. fait ensemble avec moi, c'est maman ni, me dit, il toujours dit moi, si c'est maman ni, c'est des mamans ni, me dit il y a quoi que des mamans parce que appréciation le baou, c'est accueil au maman.
One of the teacher treats me like my mother, and then she likes me so much and I like her a lot.
Qu'elle m'a souhaité nous pas bloquer que Timoun parce que lui vraiment pour ti moun yo non déjà on job avec corona pour nous fermer l'école là pour nous mettre ti moun yo n'a pas ti moun yo plus problème comparément avec parce que moi qui ça m'apprend la kala avec pam nan moi-même.
My kid experienced a lot of problem with corona. We have a lot of problem with corona. We don't want to have additional problems. Please keep the school alive.
Yeah. La souhaite que nous ta bay ti moun yo opportunité pour yo arriver dans 6e grade ensemble parce que yo joine ça yo joine dans PHA moi-même pour moi-même m'pa ko yo va joine l'autre côté parce que m'fait expérience déjà.
I don't think there is another school that would offer my kids the best opportunity. We have good experience there. My kids love that school very much.
Merci beaucoup. M'da souhaité nous apprécier parce que nous-mêmes communauté, c'est nous-mêmes qui fait communauté. Moun yo k'ap servi nous, c'est nous-mêmes qui éli, c'est nous-mêmes qui travaille pour yo. Moi-même, toujours mal voté, non, les pour mal voter parce que nous toujours fait devoir citoyen. M'da souhaité nous faire pas nous tout.
I appreciate the opportunity to express myself, and then I hope you'll keep that school alive. So we always vote. We vote so we can get service from the community. I'm hopeful that you will keep the school alive.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Victoria Labor. If you're signed into the meeting, will you please raise your virtual hand? Victoria requested Spanish interpretation.
Hola, muy buenas, Victoria. Por favor, si está en Zoom, levante su mano.
Thank you, Randolph. Victoria is not signed into the meeting. I will now activate the interpretation icon, and all interpreters will be sent to your channels so you can begin interpreting again. Our next set of speakers is Sherelle Williams, followed by Sharika Rhodes, Matt Ennis, Kyle Bounty, Jonathan Rodriguez, and Robert Jenkins. If you could please raise your hands in Zoom. Sherelle Williams.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Let me see. Okay, well, hi guys. My name is Shara Williams, and I'm the parent of Melvin, one of the coolest third graders at the PA Shaw. I've loved the PA Shaw for my son because the environment that is created within those walls has assisted in boosting my son's confidence in his education and helped him to be more self-aware. I am concerned about the future of our school because one of our classrooms is shutting down next year. This concerns me because Melvin is a former Michael E. Haynes K-0.
You've been muted. Check your, please unmute yourself. Still cannot hear you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Was that me? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Okay. Mess myself up. I feel like another transition might negatively affect the growth and improvement he has shown over the last 2 years. I believe letting him and other children complete the remainder of their elementary career at the Shaw would create a form of structure and support during these pandemic times. The Shaw is an amazing garden of many flowers that need room to blossom. Boston BPS needs to listen to family voices. This is especially important in our neighborhood of Mattapan and Dorchester because amazing schools like the Shaw are hard to come by. And the developing relationships between the schools and the community can create a positive effect in the students' engagements in their community and their enrollment at the Shaw. Please add 4th grade into our school next year so we can continue to expand to a K-6 fully inclusive school. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sharika Rhodes.
Oh, hello.
Good evening.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Sharika Rhodes, also known as Ms. Rhodes. I am a 7-year parent of the PA Shaw. I also used to work at the school for several years. I think that the PA Shaw is an awesome school. Like I said, I've been a parent there for now. My oldest child aged out 2 years ago. The Shaw has worked wonders in every way possible, from education to support to like extracurriculum activities like the Darkwing program and all the other organizations that they have come in there. Like I said, I think it's just overall a great school. They have a welcoming environment. They treat the kids respectfully like their own. Kids, like my oldest, she started there and didn't know anything about school. She was there since K1 and moved her way up until she aged out at 3rd grade. I think it's very important that the kids have an opportunity to stay within like a smaller community that they started in, as it helps them like focus, it helps them become more confident, it helps them create better relationship, social interaction skills with their friends, teachers, you know, as they move up into the higher grade levels, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, you know, they're able to go back to their younger grade levels and be able to like bond with their old teachers, which also helps them academically because they don't feel shy, they don't feel alone, they feel, you know, at home. My last 2 kids that I still have at the Shaw, one who is in the K0 class for an IEP, and the other is a 3rd grade who will potentially age out if the school is not given their broken promise of 4th and 5th grade. It's a concern of theirs, like, mommy, where am I going? What does the next grade level look like? Will my friends go with me? You know, I'll be in a new school, like what does that look like? And then not to mention in the middle of the pandemic, like these kids, they've never been exposed to another school before, but they not only have to go to another school, but you know, their parents can't come in and do, you know, open house. They can't do that like firsthand assessment of the school that, you know, we're used to. So I think, you know, to allow these kids to progress and develop into the better young men and women that they can be, I think, you know, it's a necessity. Like, to take it away from them, it causes a lot of disruption, not only just for the kids, but for the parents as well. We now have to go on a hunt to figure out where we're going to send our kids. You know, are they going to be comfortable? Are they going to be learning to their full potential because they're distracted because of
Excuse me, Ms.
an
Rhodes.
unnecessary change? Yes.
Thank you. I'm afraid you're past your time. If you could please wrap up.
Okay, just all in all, the school, we was promised a 4th grade, and I would like to see that happen as it's affecting our kids. The school is a great school. They have support system in every way. And I don't think it's fair that, you know, our Black communities are being taken, you know, for granted. There's a lot more potential that I think you guys can allow the kids to, you know, fulfill by giving them what was promised to them and us as parents as well.
Thank you, Ms. Rhodes. Next, we'll hear from Matt Ennis.
Good evening, beautiful people in front of me. My name is Matt Ennis. I'm a grade 2 educator at the PA Shaw. It is an absolute privilege to work at a school bursting at the seams with brilliance, as you've been hearing each and every week. Also, I gotta brag and say that I'm the lucky one who gets to work with Sabine Ferdinand, who has made you all smile every week. So each summer I look forward to seeing the release of the school leader appointments. Without fail, the statistic that's always at the top of this release is the percentage of the appointments of school leaders of color. We have tremendous rates, such as 87% this past year and 76% 2 years ago. It's a huge joy that should be celebrated, and it's so important for students. I think of one student in particular who runs and gives our principal a slightly aggressive but really warm, big hug each morning when she walks in. That type of representation is making her wonder if she wants to be appointed to the Supreme Court one day. President Joe Biden, call me for a reference. But now the dramatic pause. Unfortunately, has also been my experience that school leaders of color are not afforded the same opportunities to craft a vision for their school compared to their peers. Bettina Love came 2 years ago to Summer Institute and discussed freedom dreaming, creating a vision for what schools will be when the education survival complex is destroyed. I've seen this now happen at 2 schools. Both the Mattahunt and the PA Shaw. Both schools have freedom dreamed with their school community. Both schools also had Black women as the school leader. They were well ahead of their times in terms of creating more equitable learning environments for students, whether it was pushing for an inclusion model years ahead of the district, or crafting a year-long anti-racism professional development series using racial affinity groups. I want to thank the school committee members who have been engaging with us. Your commitment to learning more about our advocacy is really encouraging. With that, I also strongly encourage you to push for more details when you hear the phrase working with the school community when it comes to classroom closures. From my perspective, what that has meant is that central office is relying on the trust and support that a school leader has cultivated with their community to implement an abrupt decision, often with minimal community engagement. Finally, the PA Shaw has freedom dreamed in collaboration with the community. You can preserve the PA Shaw and its co-created vision by allowing us to add a 4th grade and taking us one step closer to being back in sync with the district vision for elementary schools and delivering on that original promise. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kyle Bounty.
Hi, I'm Kyle Bounty, proud 3rd grade teacher at the PA Shaw. I'm here today to ask with urgency that a 4th grade classroom be added to the Shaw for the 2022-23 school year and a 5th and 6th grade in the following years, with the end goal being a single strand, full inclusion K-6. It cannot be ignored that this pandemic has greatly impacted children and their well-being. A study from the University of Minnesota shows that since the pandemic began, the rate of children's depression and anxiety have doubled, with 1 in 4 children now reporting depression and 1 in 5 anxiety. Consistency and wellness go hand in hand. We know that students thrive on routine and flourish in settings where they feel safe and have strong, meaningful relationships. My current brilliant 3rd graders have not had a consistent school year since 2019 when they were in K2. Much of this year has been spent prioritizing social emotional learning, forming strong relationships with each other and the school community, and reestablishing a sense of normalcy and safety in school. Families in our community are deeply concerned that because BPS's promise of a K-5 school was broken, that our third graders and those that follow will now have their educational experience disrupted yet again. But this time it is completely avoidable. Families are asking for their students to stay in the safe learning environment that they love, and they are asking to eliminate this academic disruption by adding a 4th grade to the Shaw. Now more than ever, we are asking that you finally listen to the families of Mattapan and Dorchester and uphold the promise that was made to them and then broken. We are asking that you expand the Shaw by adding a 4th grade classroom for the 2022-2023 year and continue to add a grade until we are a single strand inclusion K-6 school. The well-being of our students and the Mattapan and Dorchester community depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jonathan Rodriguez.
Hello. Can I start?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? Hi, my name is Jonathan Rodriguez. I live in Mattapan, just down the road from the Shaw. I'm here in support of the Shaw parents, students, and educators, and really in support of them being in support of BPS aligned priorities of going to K-6 grade spans, of keeping promises to school communities. I think a lot about what we've seen throughout our city and the kind of systemic things that happen inside BPS around how we unintentionally or intentionally create these options for parents, right? Me as I don't have kids yet, but and hopefully in the near future, thinking about having kids and knowing that there are 3 great schools within a mile of my house, including the Shaw, and thinking about how BPS sends messages about the stability of schools and what is and observing for the last couple of years, this promise being broken. The clear message was that BPS was not going to continue investing in the Shaw community. And for me, that is, again, a broken promise, something that we can correct. It's promising to see the idea of quality guarantee in BPS, of holding schools harmless, of creating a less harmful WSF formula. All of that is good. The next step in that breaking that vicious cycle, that graphic we saw earlier, is to keep promises to school communities, to make sure it's predictable, to make sure they are supported. And so for me, it is simple. If a school community is asking, has a plan around this, we can make it happen. We can make sure promises are kept in the Shaw community. And I'm here as a community member, as a neighbor, in full support of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Robert Jenkins, followed by Edith Bazil and Ruby Reyes. If you can please raise your hands in Zoom. Mr. Jenkins.
Hello, can I speak?
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name, as you all know me, Bobby Jenkins. I'm a community person, Shaws in Mattapan. I've had the pleasure of teaching, I've had the chance of doing tutoring at the Shaw under the Generations, which is now Literations. But after Generations left, I came back and volunteered for the 3rd graders. And at that time, the staff is inviting the whole school, the concept. Here is a school that, it's an old school. It has a primitive, cafeteria. They use a room to do, they did a play. The playground is outdated. They were promised a new school. So if anything, the Shaw is one where they've been through many transitions. There was a break in service from an elementary school from the Shaw, and then it was an alternative school for high schoolers. So I think that there's a way to fix. If you've had teenagers in that building, there's a way to at least give them the 4th grade. And now that goes back to the budget. I look at the budget and I really like it, and I'm going to work with the district on making sure that all our students and families and community-based organizations are definitely given an equitable access to a quality education. The Matterhorn has to get renovated, as we know, and BCYF pulled out. So that's a big void in the community for Mattapan, for that school, because that site was used for the community as well as the teachers and students and families. Also with Madison Park, BCYF is pulled out. So when we talk about social and emotional learning, athletic and academics, we definitely have to look at getting more partners. I saw some of the partners that you have, but also too, BCYF is still a partner that could be, mentioned. Our community-based health organizations, they're all fighting for the same thing. You have Whittier over there by Madison Park, but also most importantly is the opportunities we can have for summer enrichment academically and athletically, and also for jobs for our older students. I'm preparing a report now and giving my feedback on the budget. But Madison Park, real quick, we need 2 family liaisons. The school has gotten larger. We have a high population of special ed students, but also too, some fixtures need to happen as well when you talk about the building. An updated security system, and that back parking lot has to be repaved because it hasn't been done in over, I think, the last 6 or 7 years. It could be longer. So I'm gonna use my 3 minutes tonight, but again, it's about, looking at the needs. Madison Park is the only vocational, school in the city, and we are making strides. We're making big strides, but again, makeup has to be done in order to present turning that jewel into a gem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Our next speaker is Edith Bazil.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair, on Black History Month, Mr. Cooter's equity talk continues to ring hollow. Here are some examples. McKinley Schools is a network of 4 schools on 3 sites that houses students with disabilities, the highest percentage Black males. The South End site sits on prime land that Mal King fought his entire life to keep from being gentrified. Black males at McKinley have the highest rate of DYS incarceration, lowest graduation rate, and in 2 years, the enrollment has dropped from over 300 students to approximately 200 students today. This decline is not addressed in your budget. McKinley High has no library, no cafeteria, no science labs, no gym. Upon entry, Black students are confronted with metal detectors, school police, and random searches. The BPS budget does not address the chronic over-policing of McKinley students and ignores McKinley in the budget. Nikki Giovanni said, "It is not who you attend school with, but who controls the school you attend." BPS's budget ignores the Black community. So what was the plan for McKinley in 2017? You guessed it, gentrification. Demolish McKinley and build a new school for Quincy Upper. Why? Because who wants Black males running around in South End's theater district? Well, the plan to demolish McKinley and build a new school for Quincy Upper failed due to protests. Bill BPS is now building a 6-story building on 1 acre of land for the Quincy Upper with rooftop outdoor classrooms and countless other perks. What do students at the McKinley get? Nothing. Nothing but silence. Madam Chair, silence is violence because it gaslights Black students into the school to prison pipeline. Another example of the budget's hollow equity words is the PA Shaw. How do you see these how do you not see the exemplary literacy work these teachers have done to bring out the best in the Shaw students as they testify, and the gratitude of Shaw's parents and students? This school community has repeatedly made heartbreaking pleas to keep their beloved school open and expand grades, but what do they get from BPS? Again, silence. Friends of Madison Park, a dedicated group of former BPS staff and community activists, have provided clear recommendations for improvement. Again, silence from BPS. Ayanna Presley said those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. This budget does not center racial equity. It also does not center research that is available for recovery and does not incorporate this research or evidence-based methods for high school redesign. It is absent of teacher supports, school-based investments, supports for students with disabilities, ELs, literacy inventions that are research and evidence-based, nor does it provide, as Mr. Cooter said tonight, quote, what families want. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ruby Reyes.
My name is Ruby Reyes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance and Dorchester resident. BPS needs to adopt a do no harm policy. The school committee needs to commit to not causing additional disruptions to any student or learning community until there is at least 1 year of steady learning. No administrator, local or at the state level, should add to the trauma students are experiencing. This includes school communities having to worry about more leadership instability, closing from enrollment decline, school budget cuts because of weighted student funding, or empty Bill BPS promises. Major holes in the FY23 budget include a disconnect from Bill BPS and addressing COVID-related needs in the coming year. We continue to need a comprehensive master facilities plan, including a full equity analysis of Bill BPS. There needs to be a clear description of what funds will be temporary in relation to the different years of ESSER. Investigate school outbreaks to identify contributing factors and mitigation measures to be taken, and share those results widely. Coordinate with healthcare partners on a robust outreach and service plan to increase the percentage of students who are vaccinated, especially focusing on students of color and students who speak languages other than English at home. Overall, evaluate the implementation of all COVID mitigation efforts to ensure racial equity using the BPS Racial Equity Planning Tool. BPS needs to guarantee an adequate ventilation and filtration in every space in which students are eating meals, maintaining and providing portable air cleaners with HEPA filters for schools without HVAC systems, and evaluate the implementation of all COVID mitigation efforts to ensure racial equity. As part of this no harm policy, BPS should update the attendance policy to ensure families do not experience truancy threats by increasing the number of absences due to COVID-related issues as a commitment to do no harm. We know that closing schools disproportionately impacts Black and Latino families and is not a long-term solution to enrollment decline across the city. Rather than the current tear-down model of destroying places of joyful learning for Black and Latino students and families, the solution is to stop closing schools and start building the things you promised. The budget needs to reflect equity and transparency in school budgets as well as building decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Robinson, that concludes our speakers for public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. And I want to thank everyone who spoke tonight. Your input is crucial, it's critical as we consider the superintendent's budget recommendations for the next fiscal year. Now, I'd like to open it up to the committee, to questions from the committee. Mr. Cardahan Hernandez.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers tonight, and of course to our superintendent. Thank you for your service. I didn't say this earlier, and I know I'm new to the team, but your leadership has really mattered. And I think to echo what Lorena said. This is it's a difficult job, and there is a history in these spaces to really take our leaders, particularly leaders of color, and make this work extra challenging for them. And so you have shown incredible grit and grace during a really difficult time for leaders and educators across the country. So really thank you for that. And the second piece I just have a question. And just to confirm, this is the topic is about the budget, or do we get to ask questions about some of the public comment?
It's about the budget.
Okay, so our opportunity for questions about public comment will be in new business. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I'm curious, as we're looking at the budget, were there any changes that our eyes should be drawn to from the last presentation? And I can ask questions in like a chunk, or I can just ask one at a time, whatever feels right for you.
Go ahead. You're okay right now. Keep going.
So I'm curious what changes we've seen. Maybe, actually, I think it'll be easier for my brain if we stop there. So I'll ask that question and then I'll keep it going.
No, this is just, so there weren't any changes to the budget proposal with what you received. This is just a sort of a different look and focused on individual school issues. We are doing a number of finalization of school conversations. We have a process we refer to as the budget collaborative process, which is our meetings with schools. And then we have a school budget review committee that is vetting different requests from schools. So typically we will come back to the committee on March 16th with any revisions and finalizations of school-based allocations and provide an update at that time.
I'm just looking at my time. My second question is around a master school plan. I think we felt this from the conversation we just heard from so many of our incredible speakers tonight in public comment. And I think it also connects deeply to the budget as we're thinking about holding schools harmless. It is connected to how many schools we think we need, where we think we need them, and a smart analysis about when we're going to need them in terms of, its relationship to time and projected enrollment decline. And so I'm curious how that sort of overlaps here and how the department's thinking about that.
You're muted.
I apparently can't click a mouse button. Critically important question for us as we start to think about what we do post-pandemic and what do we think about as we think about FY24 and beyond. So in this budget, there are a couple of investments that are going to be key to that conversation. The first is the facilities team is working on a facilities condition assessment. The facilities condition assessment allows us to know a comprehensive and consistent measure of building condition across all of our schools. So oftentimes one of the challenges, we have so many old buildings, 60% of which were built before World War II, where we have so many old buildings that oftentimes we have a hard time prioritizing which ones are in the worst condition. And as we've seen with the Jackson Man recently and with the West Roxbury Education Complex not that long ago, we find ourselves in a position where we are responding to a building emergency. So the goal there is to get an assessment of all of our buildings. On the capital side, we're partnering with the Public Facilities Department to do a study of what our K-6 and 7-12 design is going to be able to really lay out a vision for where we want to go with our school buildings. This will then define for us what our standard building is going to be, and then we can compare it to our current buildings. What that tells us is which of our buildings are already meeting some or all of our standards of having a cafeteria, a library, a gym, and which of those buildings do not have that, so that we can start planning out which of the buildings that need to come offline. And then finally, we've talked about the Reimagine School Funding project, which is a project we're launching this year to really think about weighted student funding, the interaction between enrollment and equity, and just ask some of the critical questions about how we should fund our district and what is the school that we're trying to fund at what size and with what resources. So those three pieces of information are going to be really the building blocks of a strategic plan for school building. The last thing I'll just say, because you were talking about multi-years of enrollment projection, our planning analysis team works with the Boston Planning and Development Agency to try and develop better long-term forecasts. But I will just say the most informative piece of information that we have about the next 10 years of our enrollment is our current enrollment by grade. It really tells us where we're headed as we start to look at it. Sorry, I know you only have a limited time and that was a long answer, but you asked a really great, important question. So
It was a great answer and it didn't feel too long, so we're good. But the sort of follow-up to it is one, just like clear sort of vision on sort of next steps. I'm curious about timeline. What does that look like? But I think there's a missing piece here, and it's the part that no one wants to hear, which is we may have schools in places we don't need them, and we may need schools in places we don't have them. And we may not have buildings that can operationalize for the community that's there. And so when I'm thinking about a master plan, it's all of those things, but it's also an honest conversation with Bostonians about what in 2023, 24, 25, 26, whenever the timeline is that this sort of strategy gets put into place, like how many schools do we need and where? And is that part of the portfolio planning that's happening right now? And I'm asking it because this is a big budget and some major investments. And I think we want to be smart about where we're investing and at the same time, what we're thinking about the future of our portfolio.
Yeah, I don't want to over-represent the amount of this that has already been done because this is, both complicated and incredibly important. I think some of my response to that is the question around reimagining school funding and setting the vision, I would say, first for what we want our schools to have is the first part of that conversation, because it tells us what kind of schools we want to build and have. I was in a conversation with some parents, this was a couple years ago in Charlestown, where they were talking about the Warren Prescott, and they said to us, please keep our small school community intact. It's incredibly important to us. What struck me about that conversation is that the Warren Prescott, as a multi-strand K-8 school, is actually a fairly sizable elementary school by Boston standards. Whereas when we start talking about schools like the PA Shaw or even the Philbrick in Rosendale, we're talking about very small elementary schools. And so we need to make the decision as a district, do we want to fund that model and for whom and in what neighborhoods do we want to have it? We also have the reality of small buildings that don't offer us a lot of flexibility for mergers. So we will be thinking about mergers, and the superintendent has already had us start some conversations in conversations around the Sumner and potential Philbrick. What does that look like? And those are conversations that need to happen with communities. And we need to start that conversation as quickly as possible. And I think part of this will be sequencing all of the community engagement we need to do as a district to think about how do we authentically have that conversation with schools. But I do think, and so based on those conditions, we can model out how many schools we want. If you as a school committee say to us, I want our elementary schools to be 600 students, that's a basic math problem with some assumptions that we can put in and tell you how many schools we need. But we need to set our values first about what we're looking to fund and what our schools need to look like and have that statement that the community is behind.
I know I'm out of time. I think that is a conversation that becomes more urgent every day for us to be having. And you can feel it in the public comment that in many ways, that is what folks are itching to know. And there's a level of transparency there. And last time we were together, you shared with us, there are a list of schools that you have shared with the superintendent that may be unsustainable. And that all feels connected to this larger conversation around future planning, but also transparency around our current thinking. And I hope we can find time to get back to that here.
Thank you. Ms. LaPera.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I have a lot of thoughts and I'm trying to piece them all together. I first want to start with emphasizing the points brought up by Member Cardette Hernandez. I know that we've been talking about a need to really have a facilities master plan. If we're thinking about quality, a space teaches, right? It teaches us what we value. It teaches us what we have access to. So I think that the facilities piece is crucial. As I'm listening to the public comment, and this is related to the school budgets, but as I'm listening to the public comment, I'm also really sensitive to the enrollment processes that many families are engaging with at this time. And if we don't have a clear sense of what our future is going to look like and what schools are going to exist where, then I feel we're providing options to families that aren't really full options. They don't have all of the information. We don't have all of the information. And so the sense of urgency around figuring out the facilities and a master plan and any reconfiguration that needs to happen, we need to begin to have those conversations as urgently as possible. So to my question around this, related to all of this, is we have had the privilege, and it really has been a true privilege. I've been amazed and just the work that's happening at the PA Shaw is amazing. We have first graders who are doing an amazing job reading. They wrote those essays, they feel those essays. And that means that they are learning, they are thriving, they are happy, their teachers are teaching, they are having fun, they are supported, they have a loving, joyful, beautiful, academically enriching community. That is a quality guarantee, right? That is what's happening in that building. And so as we're thinking about budgets and knowing that there is a classroom reduction in that school, for me, I'm just wondering, how are we supporting school communities like the PA Shaw? How are we really supporting them so that they can maintain what they're doing and also so they can expand, so they can actually expand the work that they're doing in those successful communities? Related to budget, how are we doing that?
Thank you for that question. I think I would just note in terms of the predictability for families, next year's budget adds sixth grade to 15 more school communities. Over the last 3 years, the superintendent has aggressively pursued grade reconfigurations to make sure that I think it's something like 38 new schools have sixth grade since she started. We're expanding more opportunities for 7 to 12 to provide predictable pathways. We're not getting to them all, but this budget does not pause on grade reconfiguration. In some ways, the reason that we're hearing and focused on the PA Shaw is because we have offered so much clarity to so many school communities that they're sort of looking around and realizing that they're one of the last schools to have that predictable pathway. And that's unfortunate, but it shows the progress we made. I will also note that the PA Shaw currently feeds the Mildred Avenue K-8, which is a high quality school in Mattapan that people have. I think it was a school on the prize, if not winner, a nominee for several years, and is a high quality learning community. So we do have a predictable pathway for families, but I do appreciate, as a school community, they want to continue to build on what they have. And I can appreciate certainly how connected they feel to their school as a parent. And I know how connected my kids feel to their school. In terms of specific supports to the PA Shaw, we do continue to offer soft landings to schools. We have asked them to adjust the capacity to close a third grade classroom because they only have one classroom worth of third grade full of third graders moving forward as students do leave the school. And And we will be having a conversation with them over the next few months to figure out a more sustainable path to a K-6, because this is clearly not working for families and is not the solution that they want.
Thank you. I'll go in the second go round.
Righty, thank you. Dr. Alkins.
Thank you again for the presentation and for the public comment. And we've spoken, Mr. Cooter, about sort of the budget, and we've spoken about sort of the concerns of the Shaw, and I did have the pleasure of meeting with that community on Monday, and really listening to the concerns. And I think the other piece within this whole conversation is sort of the need for transparency of the process, and that this lack of it has gone on for seemingly a few years now. And thinking about how the district plans to sort of rectify this in terms of talking to families and letting people know essentially why was the decision made in the first place. And it was staggering for me to even hear that there wasn't really a decision that was given as to why plans were scrapped or that plans were put together in the first place. So there's just a lot of disarray, particularly around the communication that's there. And I know with regard to the budget, I know you all are, I think what's very good is you're working with Allaview to really make it a little bit more transparent for families. But I'm also curious just as to, what are you like, how will you sort of make this a little bit more direct and transparent for families moving forward in future years?
In terms of the transparency around the planning process, or in terms of the transparency around the budget process, or both?
Well, both, really, because I think what you've heard from many members, particularly as we name the Shaw, was that there wasn't a community sort of voice in the planning process, and that they were just sort of told what was happening, and then families had to scramble to figure out what they needed to do next. And then, of course, on the flip side of it, being able to say, this is how the budget is going to actually affect day to day what's going on in my life and in my child's life as well.
I'm going to turn it over to David to talk a little bit about the transparency tools. I just want to, in terms of the budget process, I do think part of the budget process is us being very clear and going out to places like the citywide parent council and letting people know how the process works and when to advocate and where to advocate, and make sure they have all the resources they need and the information they need to be able to advocate. I have, I would say the first phase of my work here in BPS, thinking about budget, my transparency was to publish as much information as possible. And now I'm thinking about, in trying to partner with the community, how do you create resources and tools that allows people to access it and understand it better. And that's part of the work with Allaview. In terms of the capital planning process and the PA Shaw, I do think in a lot of ways the PA Shaw has revealed flaws in our communication and flaws in our strategic planning process, but it's also a good lesson in how long quick decisions will affect us as a district, and will leave future versions of leadership and future versions of the school committee scratching their head about what happened. So when the PA with Shaw was opened in 2014, they had the number of classrooms in the building that they have now. And they were originally going to open as a single strand school because at the time the district didn't have much of a plan around small schools. And because of a need for more K2 seats, the strategic planning unit decided to open at the time 2 K2 classrooms and open it as a double strand school. If they had really thought through the full progression of the school, or maybe they did and just had aspirational plans, they would have seen that K-5 never fit in the building. And so in 2018, when we notified the school that they would not be expanded into K-5, we were basically giving them information that we could have told them years before. And then since then, it is very clear that we have not done a good job communicating and making sure people are clear that the configuration promises that were made nearly a decade ago were not changing. And we announced that 3-4 years ago. What has, I think, spurred this conversation this year about the PA Shaw is two things. One, they're seeing the number of other schools that are reconfiguring and wondering when their turn is. And two, the closure of the third grade classroom creates an opportunity for part of that reconfiguration, but not the full part. And I think part of the push-pull of urgency and thoughtfulness is that we want to make a quick decision to solve the challenge for these students, but it was a quick decision nearly a decade ago that got us into this position where we would have an unfilled promise to a school community because we weren't thoughtful and really planned out the implications across the district. And so, you know, I do think that's a tension that we feel. Overall, we do need to get much more transparent how the capital budget process works, how our planning process works, because, you know, it's not clear about how things get in the queue. And that's something that the superintendent's pushed us on, and we still have a lot of work to do. David, sorry, that was a long answer, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Alview and some of the tools that are coming, but.
Yeah, I would just add, I think part of our progression as we've thought about the way we advance our work in the finance division has been really sort of learning and growing through our work around community engagement. And I think, you know, Nate earlier was talking about Dr. Caselius' sort of parting gifts to us and her lasting legacy. I think part of it will be embedded in some of the projects we're starting now, but will live long past her time with us. And, you know, when we did our long-term financial planning 5 years ago, we had a robust advisory council of stakeholders who were advising the work that happened. And we thought to ourselves, we've done such a good job with community engagement. And the net result of that was there were maybe a dozen more members of the community who deeply understood the long-term financial plan than who otherwise would have. And that the school committee felt very much engaged in it, which was great. But it really wasn't a robust community engagement effort. So as Nate also talks about things like redesigning the weighted student funding model, one of our main takeaways was when we launch projects like that, we need to embed community engagement as a key part of the work. So if you were to review our RFP documentation for that project, you would see that that project had two parts. Part one was community engagement and part two was the technical work. And they were given equal weight in the RFP. That our expectation was that whoever was coming to help us do this work had community engagement and a community engagement plan as a key part of the work, because it is unfair of us to ask our existing community engagement team to add supporting us in this work as a part of what they're already doing. And so I just wanted to say that is a continued hope of ours and goal of ours as we roll out these new initiatives to really embed that community engagement work in each part of our project plans and our thinking as we move forward.
Okay. Going to move on to Ms. Polanco Garcia.
Gracias, Madam Chair. Quiero poder entender, tengo varias preguntas. La primera que me gustaría preguntarles es con relación a los fondos ESSER. Sé que hace 2 reuniones pasadas, la superintendente había dicho que habían escuelas que no habían solicitado, los principales no habían solicitado a través de la mesa de equidad los fondos ESSER. La primera pregunta es saber qué ha pasado con eso y cuáles son esas escuelas.
I do have a couple of questions here. Apparently, a couple of meetings we had ago was regarding the ESSER funds that had not been requested through the equity team. I just wanted to know what the status is regarding this, regarding the equity funds that had been requested. That's one of my questions that I do have.
Quiero saber cuáles son esas escuelas que no lo han solicitado y transparentemente cómo se extrapola esto con el presupuesto, ¿verdad?
So that is the question I have in particular. Which in particular are the schools that have not requested the ESSER funds that I mentioned? How does that extrapolate with the budget, and what type of implications does it have in the budget itself?
Mr. Kudo, okay, thank you.
At this point for current, most of the concerns from schools was around current year FY22 ESSER allocations. At this point, all schools have requested their funding, and funding has been going out to schools for them to be able to begin some of their work. I'm going to defer most of those questions to our ESSER team led by Ava Mitchell, who is planning to come back to the committee with an update on the ESSER 3 application and provide a lot more details. I'll just say that as part of our budget collaborative process through FY23 planning and through partnership with our two teams, we are doing more to begin the planning for next year's spending so that a lot of the delays you heard about this year don't continue into next year, that we have a thoughtful plan and we've been able to vet each of the individual school plans for how it will impact their students next year.
Pero tengo entendido que hay algunas escuelas que no lo habían solicitado. De las 125 escuelas, solo 90 y algo de escuelas eran las que habían solicitado esos fondos. Mi pregunta es específicamente, ¿cuáles son esas escuelas? Si puedo tener la información de esas escuelas que no han solicitado esos fondos.
It is my understanding that out of 125 schools, 90-something the schools had requested the funds, and there were part of those schools that had not requested the ESSER funds. So my question in particular is, which schools in particular out of those 125 where funds were allocated had not requested this funds, in particular the ESSER funds? If I can have the specifics and which are those schools will be beneficial.
We'll certainly come back and provide us update with the ESSER team. But at this point, all of the schools have requested their FY22 current year ESSER funding and have applications in. I know there were a few schools that had outstanding. We were still waiting for applications and information about how they're spending. But at this point, all schools have submitted.
Ok. Entonces, el otro punto que yo quiero clarificar es, vamos a seguir reuniéndonos y vamos a tener más conversación sobre el presupuesto. Pero es importante que las familias puedan ver claramente con la transparencia, ¿verdad? ¿Cuál va a ser el soporte que van a tener las familias aprendices del idioma inglés dentro del presupuesto específicamente? ¿Cómo van a tener los programas? ¿Cómo vamos a ayudar a estas familias?
I do understand that there will be meetings ahead regarding budgetary concerns and budgetary conversations. My question in particular is some of the families, what type of families of supports, in particular the ELA families, will be getting in terms of budgetary information, and how are we going to engage these families in these conversations, particularly the ELA category of families, regarding budgetary allocation of resources? How can we engage them?
Y también los estudiantes con altas necesidades especiales, que podamos ver transparentemente, que estas familias puedan ver en el presupuesto qué ellos van a tener dentro del presupuesto, a qué han sido tomados. Sé que han sido tomados en cuenta porque hemos hablado, ustedes han hablado sobre esto, pero tenemos que ver lo que ellos puedan sentirse confiados de saber que han sido tomados en cuenta dentro del presupuesto.
Transparency is absolutely a top priority. How can we communicate to these families or let them know that this is a transparent process, that these families are being considered and are taken in consideration regarding a specific group of, for example, the kids with special needs? How can we create a transparent process to let these families know what is happening with this budgetary limitations, or how funds are allocated into the special needs population?
It's a really critical question. I don't think I have a good answer to. You know, we are engaged with the EL task force and have an annual presentation with them where we'll talk about the budget, but that's not, I think what you're talking about is direct engagement with families. And I think I'll just say, I would love to meet with you and talk more about ideas for how we can go from transparency as is translated documents to what I was talking about, which is partnership and thinking of ways to make sure families both understand the budget and understand the process, and then believe that their voice in the process affects the outcome. Because that's the other piece of it is advocacy does change our budget at both throughout this process, throughout city council process, but really on an annual basis as we evaluate and change the process. I'll also, I'll set up time because I think we need to talk about the Reimagine School Funding Project, because that's such a, that is a potential change and shift that could affect multiple years of budgets. And if we're not thoughtful about specific engagement with EL communities, I think we're going to miss a huge opportunity. So I look forward to your partnership on that.
Sé que se me terminó mi tiempo, pero no puedo dejarle pasar esto, y es con relación a la escuela CHAP que hemos estado hablando. Es impresionante ver esos niños ya primer grado como leen, cómo pueden leer.
So I do know that I'm a little bit over my time. However, it is a critical point that I would like to make regarding the school that we have mentioned, the PH school that is PH Shaw. It is very impressive to see how these kids are able to read already.
Todos hemos visto cómo ellos han venido a leer, a presentar sus historias, decir sus testimonios, pero eso significa que hay una comunidad, tanto de padres como de maestros, que están trabajando juntos.
I am very pleased to hear. It is very rewarding to see them come here to this meeting and read what they would like to share, meaning that there has been an involvement and a partnership between the teachers and the parents and the community to enable this process to happen.
Entonces vemos una escuela aquí de comunidad que está abogando, y le doy las gracias a todos los que han presentado sus testimonios, porque están luchando por ir por más. Y cuando un estudiante quiere ir por más y una familia, debemos pensar y ser parte de ese crecimiento, de esa comunidad y de esos estudiantes, y por vía de consecuencia de los maestros también.
I do have to acknowledge the testimony that many persons here, participants had shared with us, which is critical to hear what they have to say. It is important to hear what are their expectations, in terms of growing, and how is the community engaging with this particular population. So I do commend some of the comments that we hear from the speakers.
Aplaudo a esos niños, aplaudo su tenacidad y aplaudo a los maestros por el magnífico trabajo que están haciendo.
I have to say, I do have to applaud the kids themselves for the great job they're doing. I do have to applaud the teachers for their fantastic job they're doing. And I do have to appreciate the process in general.
Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Carter Hernandez.
Hi, thank you again. Just a few follow-up questions and some new ones that I'm looking at my timer. I just want to say, I know, Nate, that you were sharing, you know, the greatest predictor of our enrollment is obviously, you know, sort of who comes in at our earliest grades. But I was sort of saying this last time we were together, there is some sort of hard conversations that we have to have around anticipated decrease year over year, unless the district believes that we will stabilize enrollment in the early grades. And so there is, and I think this connects back again to a master plan and some of these more sort of tough conversations about our future. But unless we think like the enrollment decline is going to stop in our earliest grades, there's some like long-term planning that I hope we are doing, that I'm not sure I'm seeing how it lives in this budget. around the future of our system, with an anticipation that we hope to narrow the decline, but it will probably continue year over year unless something else changes. Is that fair to assume?
I think that's right. I think part of what we're looking at is intervening by offering the quality guarantee and investing in new resources. In prior budgets, going back even 3-4 years ago, when we would have been talking about hold harmless, we wouldn't have been talking about hold harmless while also increasing the resources at individual schools and being able to provide the types of supports that students and families want. Being able to invest in libraries while we are dealing with massive enrollment declines is a unique situation. And so I do think that we should be talking more about the great things that are happening at our schools. And one of the things I'm always intrigued by I notice when people start talking about their individual schools is they sort of feel like they're the ones who are on an island, and that there are other school communities, but by and large, our families love their schools, and we need to start telling that story more, because I do think that BPS should be a higher choice for more families, and that we would serve a lot of communities well. While we also need to do the long-term planning, you're absolutely right. We need to have that critical conversation with the new administration and Mayor Wu's administration, with a large new, a number of new members of the school committee and new members of the city council. I think there's a new opportunity to have a conversation about the direction of BPS in this way.
Yeah, and the sort of quality early childhood option at the beginning too, to get families in the door, and how we're thinking about a universal pre-K in like a real honest way, like a universal application, a universal system, like a real high quality option that doesn't place the burden on discovery on our families, but becomes something that we're holding as a system.
And never to forget, universal pre-K is absolutely a pro-enrollment strategy. We have some challenges with our universal pre-kindergarten in that our Latino families are not accessing universal pre-kindergarten at the same rate that other demographic groups are. And I think that some of our children who come from immigrant families are losing out on this benefit, and we need a strategy for that. Also, we have charter schools that serve a large proportion. I think last time I looked, it was somewhere around 22,000 students are in charters. We have 7,200 students, 7,300 students in private schools. And so there are students in Boston we can serve if we're delivering on a quality guarantee. And I can't remember the number of students that leave on Metco buses, but it would be great to be able to have a pro-enrollment strategy around UPK and the quality guarantee, and tie that to excellent facilities. So when parents come through the door, they not only are greeted by incredibly caring and competent teachers as their children turn 3 and 4 years old, but they go through doors and they're in schools that have gymnasiums and libraries and social workers and nurses and everything that they should have. And that is really the goal. And then that's when you stabilize enrollment and you see more pulling off of more of our share of the Boston students, school-age children.
I will say, and I'm in all of it, and I believe in that, and I think this budget helps us get to some of that. I am still trying to enroll my kid in pre-K, and it has been a very, very difficult process.
Well, you should call the number.
I know I can call. I know I can
do appointments, and they help walk families through it. And
But superintendent, with this, we could take this conversation offline. There are times I haven't got my phone call returned. And so it's a challenging system to navigate. And some of the pro-enrollment strategy also starts with, and we've talked about this, but like with the sort of welcoming into that space, whether that's peak enrollment
I would not argue with you about that. I mean, we absolutely need a better technology and we need more people. And coming out of this surge, you know, we are experiencing the same labor shortages as many others, but certainly give us a call and I will be sure, because you should not be that long. And I would do that for any parent and people know that. I get back to folks. So absolutely.
Thank you. Am I out of time with my personal enrollment drama? All right, I will come later. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Mr. Tran.
Oh, thank you. I've been hearing committee members talking about all these issues for the last, I don't know, half an hour or maybe more. I share some of them, but I disagree with many. And I'm going to speak very loudly here in support of the administrative staff. I think they are doing a heck of a job. Let me tell you this. The population of the city of Boston is approximately about 675,000 people. Out of that, there's approximately 12% of people under the age of, between the age of 5 and the age of 18 who are eligible for high school. So that comes out to be about, I would say, about 81,000 youngsters. Out of that, we have 49,000. So that equates to about 61%. I understand. 61% that we are serving the youth of Boston is not a heck of a great number, given the median income of Boston family is approximately about 36,000. So there's no way that the other 39% can afford private school and all that. But I do understand charter school does take a chunk out of it. Of course, you know, there are other programs that kids are available to, and I understand that the problem we are facing that may discourage parents to send their children to school, such as math score low grade, such as the quality. I agree with the superintendent, but I also believe that we are doing the best we can. We are improving on it on a daily basis. We recognize, you know, the issues there. Even in the time of having a decrease, we did receive additional funding. So there is a commitment to increase. But at the same time, this is a long problem that we have been dealing with, you know, through, I don't know, maybe the last 20 superintendents since the early 80s when I was a teacher. That was like 42 years ago, and we're still dealing with it. So I think we are doing the best we can. I think we need to support the staff. We need to throw our support behind it, and we need to help them find other innovative ways to improve it. That is our job. Thank you.
Any comment before we move on? No. Thank you, Mr. Tran. Ms. LaPera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think it's important to recognize that hard work is happening and that these challenges have existed for a long time. But if we don't do some things differently, then 50 years from now, folks will be having the same conversations. And that I want more for our city, and I want more for our children. And so I do appreciate the work that's being done. And I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and continue to do more work and do better work if possible. So I think, you know, the pieces that I want to point out, and I know this is a point that I was bringing up before, but I'll continue to do so. Chief Cooter, one of the things that you mentioned was that sometimes quick decisions are made, right? Like, and folks make those decisions, and we don't see the ripple years down the line. And so I think that the other side of that coin is we make a budget decision. And in this example, I think that the PA Shaw is a really good example to look at what it means, what it's meant in the past, and then what it can mean in the future, right? Make a budget decision in closing a third grade classroom, or just reducing a school size. And what it can do, and what I see it doing, is that it's creating anxiety for families in a community. Because what it's doing is they're seeing that there are district-wide decisions about a move to go to K-6 or K-8. And that is a decision that we've made as a community. But the PA Shaw doesn't fit into that. It doesn't currently fit into that. And so if it's not on the list to expand to a K-6 or a K-8, which is what we're saying, we're moving our district towards that model, then it makes sense for the PA Shaw community to think that at some point in the future, it doesn't exist. And that is I think the root cause here is what trust exists between the district and the community, right? Like, to me, that's the root cause that I'm seeing here. And so, again, I know I'm harping on this, but we have to push to prioritize a real analysis around enrollment, currently, future, and facilities. Because the decisions that we make today need to be working towards a vision. And the community needs to be a part of creating that vision. And they need to not feel anxiety about what is the school going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. The other point that I'll mention is we've heard and we've seen, I've been on this board when some of these decisions were made. There's been a lot of work that's been done to reconfigure more of our schools to that K-6, 7 through 12 model. Again, but we're making those decisions without a clear understanding of when some of those school communities are going to have adequate facilities. So, example, we have schools that will have 6th grade next year, and they should have a 6th grade. They're doing good work. The community has asked for that, but they're also in temporary spaces. And so what is the plan? At what point will these schools actually be full, whole communities with all of the things that they deserve? So the question is, when we think about next year, what are the clear investments? And I know part of this is through capital, but part of it is also through our operational budget. What are the clear investments that we are making to address these gaps around the promises that we're making to school communities and these grade reconfigurations?
So thank you. I think there's a lot there to unpack. I would say, first, as it relates to the PA Shaw, I definitely agree that part of the concern that they have is seeing how they fit into the configuration. And I do think it's also the place where things for us from a district view and the personal experience at the school level can feel very different. In Mattapan, there are three, or in the Mattapan lower part of Dorchester, there are three schools that are in that K-3 configuration. The Ellison Parks, the PA Shaw, and Lee Academy. So addressing the PA Shaw is not addressing the different configuration challenges that we have. And I think, again, the original design of that neighborhood, without looking at, to your point, long-term enrollment plans and feeder patterns for how people actually navigate the district, was to have K-3 schools that fed Mildred Avenue as a 4-8. Then Mildred Ave community advocated for a K-8. They got it, then triggering other people to have to change their configuration and their feeder pattern. And so we do need to be thoughtful about the long-term planning. And I do, you're right. So the original plan for this year's budget and change to K-6 configuration was that 3 schools were not going to have a K-5 solution or K-6 solution. They were going to stay K-5 and we were going to change their feeder pattern. That original proposal was based on the idea that we didn't yet know what the long-term plan was. But we were asked to, and we found temporary solutions, including an off-site solution for both the Sumner and the Mendel, while we continue to explore other possibilities for midterm solutions while we do long-term building plans. All of this is, we're trying to balance urgency and responsiveness with the time it takes for long-term planning. But to go back to the investments that are in the budget to help us achieve and do better for our communities and to do better at this work. The first, a capital investment around the plan to come up with our K-6, 7-12 study, so we can clearly define what it is we want our school buildings to look like, what resources we want them to have. The second is an investment in capacity in both the operations department and on the Build BPS team to be able to make sure that we have the resources that we need to do this work. It takes a team of analysts, project managers, people who can put together the planning for each of these individual schools and do the work that it takes, as David mentioned, to engage with communities about that plan. Those are all operating investments to complement the capital investments. And I'm sure I'm missing different points that you made, because I think what you're asking about are the critical parts of this budget. We are able to make significant investments. I think everybody's on board with that, but we're all sort of seeing the looming decisions that we need to confront as a district. And those are the conversations that we need to have, not just as part of the FY23 budget conversation, but needs to be part of our planning going for the next few years so that we emerge from the ESSER funding as a stronger district and in a better configuration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Alkins?
Yeah, I just, in hearing, and in hearing some of the comments, I just want to sort of echo the sentiments raised by Lorena, in the sense that I think everybody here is certainly proud of the work that has been done to date, and confident in that. And that's just a basic principle of critical feedback, that you can still be critical of what's on the table and still be encouraging at the same time. And I think everybody here is attempting to do that. And in our analysis, we do so with the intention of mind to come out on the other side better. And I just want to raise that concern, because in the event that anything is taken as a lack of confidence within what has been put forward, that is not the case, at least from my standing. But of course, this is something, especially I can say for myself as a new committee member, that I'm getting up to speed on all of these things, and naturally going to have a lot more questions and a lot more things that are of concern. And so I look forward to having more of these conversations, not just here, but with people individually, so that I get a better sense of what's going on and that I can be a better advocate for these communities. And I think part of the reason why we are saying some of these things is because I can say, like, I've gone to the communities and they've said that they haven't had this at all. They haven't had that direct contact with people for either from necessarily the school committee on a regular basis or just from the district. And so that's what we're hoping to transform here. And so, last, I just want to say that I commend everybody here for their tireless dedication to it, and that we are in the fight with you. And thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carter Hernandez.
I'm echoing what has been said. I support the work that everyone is doing, and I know how hard you are working. I've been in a different city, but on the other side, and I know how complex this charge is. And at the same time, I'm asking questions, to Stephen's point, because I'm getting up to speed, and I'm asking questions because that's the job. And I want to be able to probe and ask the questions that represent our communities across the city. Sometimes I'm asking questions I even think I might have an answer to, but I still think it matters to get the question on the record. And I keep thinking about our teachers, actually, just as our school committee is forming and we are getting to know each other, and all of us are getting to know each other on Zoom. And our teachers went through this parallel process with us, getting to know classrooms of students on Zoom and to try to build community and a culture in this way. And it's hard and it's clunky and it's awkward, and we don't even see each other's toes moving or our legs when we stand up. Like, it's a tough process. So it's powerful because this is what our school leaders and our teachers have gone through. And we're figuring out too, and it's tough work. And I'm just going to ask a question because I have 4 minutes and 20 seconds. So 2 things I just want to also echo I want to echo Stephen and say, I have also engaged in conversations with some of the PA Shaw family and staff. I think there's like the engagement process that happens before we start. And then there's the engagement that happens throughout that builds clarity. And so you have a lot of families, I think, who also enrolled in the school with a plan that was shared 3 years ago and not clarity on what the future was. And there is something that the moment I register, I should know we're not growing. And there is this, and this goes back to a master plan for our schools and that level of transparency and the hard conversation that we're going to have. And I think we've said it. It's something we're committed to. We're all committed to. And I can tell from our BPS colleagues, this is something we're committed to, but there is a sense of urgency in getting this information out that helps us know where we're going, when we're getting there. And at the same time, as I'm looking at slide 19, this level of investment in soft landings is just not sustainable. Particularly as we continue to see enrollment decline, we're only going to see more spend here. It's doubling. And it's a great gift for schools. I've been a school leader who needed to be held harmless. And at the same time, as enrollment, as numbers decline, school communities that may not make. And so we have to figure out a long-term solution so that doesn't become our spend in this one area, but we're investing the money in a way that brings stuff and things to kids so that it accelerates learning. But my question, I'm looking at slide 26. I have a question particularly around investment in special education for non-native English speakers or ELs. And I am actually talking about the marriage of those identities. And so I see there's sort of separate categories in our special ed funding, and there's a category around how we're thinking about expanding access for bilingual supports and native language programming. But is there strategic investment in our young people? And I actually think the number is growing. If someone can give us that data, that would also be helpful. But is there strategic investment for students with disabilities receiving native language instruction?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over, I think, first to David Bloom, and then see if Farah Saraj has other things that she wants to add. Anytime we start talking about the overlap between English learners and students with disabilities, I do feel the need to give a hat tip to John Mudd, who asks me about this at every ELL task force and asks me about it every budget process. So it's a really important question. So I'll turn it to David.
Gosh, you're gonna make me speak before Farah about this. That's a dangerous thing. I will say, I know we have a dedicated team of folks who work across both divisions who are formally assigned to both the Office of Special Education and the Office of English Learners, who are really thinking deeply about the programming. And I know, you know, the way we've represented tonight's investments has to do with the sort of historical way we represent investments, and that they are assigned to particular departments. And so there is a separate Department of Special Education and Department of English Learners, but both departments are thinking in their investments about that overlap as a key issue. So that's the part I had. As far as here to add anything else, I would love to hear that.
Thank you. Brandon, do you have your answers? Do you have
No,
another question?
I'm just curious. I'm like actually talking about localized support for that population. So there's like the first piece just do we have the data point of how many, what's our population of students who are special ed or in special ed programming who are also ELs? And then
I believe
as we're
I believe we're going to actually be doing, one of the hearings is going to be on special ed and EL. If we could come back to that, I think that would be great.
That's great. Yeah, and then that will be good just to think about how we're targeting programming.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's going to be critical to be able to show that to the community, particularly John Mudd, who often reminds us of that.
Good.
We'll be doing a deep dive. This is a 2-month process, you guys.
I love it.
We'll be doing a deep dive.
And I'll just say the specifics I can give you tonight. I can tell you that one of the investments that the Office of English Learners has put forward in their category is an investment in growing the number of bilingual special education paras we have to make sure that they're providing native language support embedded in the instructional support that is in those strands.
I'm excited to hear more, particularly as we're thinking about, yes, the para support, but also the direct instruction through a teacher and where that's, you know, that lives. And this is a community that I think we all can agree on in two subsets of communities that are often forgotten, this sort of overlap in multiple identities. This is not like a unique problem here. This is like a global problem in how those students become invisible in our system.
Mhm. Does anyone else have any additional questions?
Madam Chair Robinson, I just wanted to add to that point that we will have a specific delineation of how we are spending our ESSER investments with the overlap of English learners and disabilities. I am serving as the interim assistant superintendent for English learners as well. And it has been a long-term issue in the district. And I think one of the key issues that has been brought up tonight is how we are spending and allocating funding at the school site and school level. And so we will do some more digging to make sure that we also provide that information. So outside of the district investments, what are schools doing to support ELs with disabilities?
Mhm.
Thank you.
I have a few more questions if there's no one else. Is that okay, Chair?
Go ahead, and I'll go at the end. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I'm actually really almost done. I just have a question for slide 22. One, this is exciting, like to be able to meet national standard in the area of increasing student supports, particularly for mental health service, but also the sort of pathway support as students are, you know, gaining credits in the system. I'm actually curious, and I'm just wondering on a school-based level, but this might also be a central support that will be part of that conversation later. Where is the support sort of focus for acute crisis that we're seeing in schools, and how are we thinking about sort of emergency and trauma response in schools? And I'm not sure if that is already sort of layered in the system and we're good, or if there's an increased investment given the heightened acute need we're seeing young people experiencing right now.
Because of the pandemic, we have added social workers in every school, at least one. And now in this budget, we're adding clinical psychologists. I think it's 26 of them. And also that will bring us to the national average of 1 to 500, which will help provide the teamwork that's needed around this acute kind of mental health services. And then also we have added the family liaisons for the crisis for the families. And then I think one thing that we will be doing is with some of our ESSER funding is the elementary counselors will do a lot of prevention and working with our younger students so that, you know, you catch it earlier and support students then. And then also at the 1 to 250 at the high school level, except within 9th grade, the 1 to 150. So having these teams of folks working together is really what's going to provide a nice supportive environment for, I mean, I don't know that that exists. It's never existed anywhere in a school that I've worked in to have this level of support for a team. And I think that we're making these priorities really because the students have asked us to make them and teachers so that they could have more humane, you know, supportive environments where we're focusing on those relationships and really providing the direct supports to students. We also have, I can't remember the number of partnerships through our coordinated behavioral health services and the way that they work with children's and other mental health providers within their community to provide direct resources and supports to our kids. And then we work with the Boston Health Commission as well and their SOAR team and our prevention unit within our safety division. And so that's also been a way to work on some of the acute kind of things that flare up. And we have a helpline for our students that the students put together a couple years ago, I think it was in December. So
you are right. Like it's historic, the investment, particularly the 10 million for academic counseling, pre-K through 8. And I know the critique will be more, and I can imagine the complexity will be staffing these positions given the demand elsewhere for this talent. So
if we start early,
yep,
we
it's
pay
exciting.
pretty well. We pay pretty well in Boston. If we start early, we are able to get diverse candidates. We saw that happen with our social workers. Although I do think particularly this year, it's 2 years of the pandemic. I think it's hard. I think, you know, there is a crisis right now where we are pretty worried about labor shortages.
My last question is just around the investment in athletics. And I'm curious if part of those resources are being funded to increase access to sports for young people with disabilities.
I believe so. You know, in Minnesota, we have wonderful programs called DAPE, programs for students with disabilities. I don't have the exact breakout of the vision but we can certainly get that for you from Avery.
Great, I think.
Maybe Nate, one of the next budget hearings, we can have a little bit more on the athletic vision that we'd like to have elementary through 12th grade.
That would be great. The athletic vision and its relationship to access for kids with disabilities. And the same is true for some of the arts programming too, and how that makes its way. The enrichment programming makes its way into specialized programming for students with disabilities as well. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of my companions. Thank you for all right, Ms. LaPera, go ahead. Sorry.
One question, sorry. Member Cardette Hernandez is rubbing off on me. One question, as I was listening to the supports and the increase in investments to support students, especially around mental health needs, I'm wondering what, if anything, we're doing for staff, just in terms of supporting. You all know this because you're in this, but it's an incredibly difficult time, and especially folks who are taking care of our students and trying to teach and also trying to take care of all the needs just wondering how we're thinking about the additional mental health supports in relation to any staff supports.
I know that there is mental health supports for our mental health providers, like our social workers, our counselors, our psychologists. We also have employee assistance programs. But I'd have to circle back with Andrea Amador and have get you a brief on the exact numbers of staff accessing those programs and things. I don't have that at my ready tonight.
Yeah, or I'm also just thinking, you know, obviously more adults that are in the building who are supporting students can lessen the challenges that then teachers are engaging. But are there any also cross learnings from folks who could be supporting staff in just different strategies to engage in with students, but then also perhaps for themselves? I'm hearing from educators and people are just maxed out. And so I'm worried about the people who are charged for taking care of our children, and just trying to figure out like how we're supporting their mental health and well-being to ensure that they can continue to do the most important job there is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Nima Avashi had a really great article this morning in the WBUR. And I think she spoke with them as well about just, you know, teachers now and their conversations about how tired they are and how exhausted they are. This particular surge this past January was extremely hard on everybody. And a number of our staff got sick themselves, and, you know, they have the effects of just not being well physically. And so there's a lot going on, not just mental, but physical, or they're caring for other family members or elderly parents, and just the normal stresses of life, you know, in a family. So, you know, I think I will just need to come back around. I don't have right here at hand what we're doing. I know that our team is doing some work, but I'll need to get back to you on the exact pieces and the number of folks accessing that. We do have employee assistance programs, and we have our affinity groups, because there's also the racial unrest of those added pressures as well. So we can put that together for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cardet Hernandez.
And then we're really done. But just to, because I'm just curious from Ms. Lopera's point, there's not additional investment in this, in services for mental health support for staff. Is that fair to say?
There's not an explicit investment to do anything for staff. But I do want to point out, in the interest of this being an opportunity for us to talk about ways that we currently spend our money, the Boston Public Schools, through the city of Boston, offers really competitive health insurance benefits and other employee benefits, which includes mental health services that's covered as part of our benefits. And then there's new programs that they're rolling out. The name of the new program is slipping me, but it's about employee wellness, trying to do more of the proactive work and getting employees to focus on their health. But I do think the core, you know, a number of the core issues is, as the Ms. Lopera, your question started with, is teachers or parents. They're dealing with a lot at home. They're dealing with family members. They're coming in. There's a lot of stress around the day-to-day work. And then we have staffing shortages that are causing challenges from busing to food services. It is an incredibly stressful environment for people to be working in. And we recognize that. And part of our investment in more resources is to make sure that there are staff to support students and support school leaders. And then, of course, we have an incredible effort through our human capital team to make sure that we post all of our teacher vacancies and all of our budgeted positions by March 1st. This has been a longstanding priority for our district. What it allows us to do is hire early and make sure we are recruiting the best talent to Boston. As the superintendent said, we have incredibly, we have competitive compensation packages. Our average teacher salary is over $100,000 for next year. So people should know that and come work for the Boston Public Schools.
Thank you. Any last questions before we move on? Great, thank you. I just have a couple. One, do we have an analysis of how many of our smaller schools are single strand schools?
Yes, so we have, for each of our schools, we have for each of our schools serving students in grades K through 8, we have what's called a configuration map, which shows you class by class and program by program what each school serves. And we can identify the number of single strand schools. We do have very few truly single strand, meaning one classroom per grade schools. And then we have a number of schools that have a single strand through some of the grades with different configurations, and then a single gen ed strand or a single inclusion strand with some special education programming. But we can provide for you the visuals of each school so you can see each of the schools in the categories. We don't have the same configuration maps for high schools just because of the way high school scheduling works. We don't think of them as strands. This is mostly an elementary school kind of language.
Yeah. You know, given the PA Shaw concerns and their request to become a single strand school, do they have currently in that building enough space to do that?
There is enough space in the current building for them to be a single strand pre-K through 6 school. There is not enough space for them to add grades without removing one of the strands from the early grades. And this is what led to, there was a statement I made when I met with the school community that has been misunderstood. Well, part of it was by adding the 4th grade, we think that some of the reason families are leaving the school is because there's not a 5th, 6th grade at the school. If we start to add a 4th and 5th grade, part of the reason we're able to consolidate in 3rd grade is because families leave it after enrolling in the early grades. So if we add that 4th grade, we think we'll lose less 2nd graders and less 3rd graders. Therefore, you'll need the extra classrooms in the earlier grades. There's a lot of evidence from that from back when we were rolling them up. And so that's why we would have to move to have them be a single strand school, and they would have to eliminate one of their K2 classrooms, one of their 1st grade classrooms, one of their 2nd grade classrooms over the next few years to accommodate a K-6 configuration.
And how would that impact the Mildred?
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah, great point.
I mean, it's a chess game, right?
Right,
You know,
because it's
so-
like they were expecting those 3rd graders, and if they're not getting that 4th grade, it creates a problem somewhere else. And that's part of what our issues have been, yes.
I just wish, you know, Nate, if you could talk just briefly. I know you shared this with Dr. Elkins when he answered, but I think it's just worth stating again the history of the PA Shaw, that in 2014 it opened, and then you have these 3 K3 schools in the area. They were supposed to feed the Mildred, which only had grades 4 through 8. There was community advocating for the Mildred to have the lower grades, which it did not have because there was already an established feeder of the 3 K3s that were going to feed into Mildred. And that was like the whole like Mattapan alliance, so to speak, almost like the Grove Hall Alliance, right?
Right.
And then there was advocacy for the Mildred, and the school committee decided to give them the early grades, and now that's impacting the other schools. So there was a plan, it
Right.
was communicated. Now there's a different plan that the committee has laid out to have K8s, 9 through 12, K6, 7 through 12, and has charged me with these reconfigurations. And so now I think you have the PA Shaw saying other schools are going K6, we would like to be K-6. And so that's a request that they're bringing forward to the school committee. But it will have an impact on the other schools, and it won't still answer the questions at the Lee or the Ellison, who may also then want to expand as well. And so I think that's the beautiful thing about this RFP we're going to do. The group we're going to bring in who can bring this comprehensive plan. Obviously, we've been in a pandemic 2 years and have not been able to have this level of engagement and, you know, this level of disruption, because we would have been bringing school closures, school mergers, and a lot of disruption to the school community during a time when we've been going remote, going, you know, in person. It becomes really, really disruptive to have been thinking we could bring all those plans. I don't know, Nate, is that correct? Did I blotch anything in that explanation? Because feel free to correct me if I've missed something.
No, I mean, I do think it is interesting that having the PA Shaw as a K-3 was part of a strategic plan from the district there. You know, if you look back in I believe it was like somewhere around 2007, 2008, 2009, there was this plan that had that K-3, 4 to 8, 9 through 12 configuration, because that's what made sense for buildings. And then the families, you know, that never worked. And so we're now trying to unravel some of that. In the same way that there was a strategic plan to roll out K-8s without really understanding its impact on our standalone middle schools. And so what we're trying to do is make sure, and as part of the enrollment projections and analysis, really look at how students navigate the system and respond to what families are showing us how they respond. And so that K-6, 7 to 12 is a response to how families already navigate our system. It's not us sort of theorizing about how they should navigate a system.
Thank you. My last question really is something that we probably need to discuss in another setting around this, but my question is really about fundraising. You know, that a lot of schools supplement their budgets with fundraising, some more successful than others. And then on the other flip side of it is all of the folks who submit applications to Donors Choice. And do we look at those dollars that are coming in, often particularly at the classroom level, to do some of the small things? You know, I mean, better crayons, I mean, masks. I mean, I go on there and I look and I'm wondering, are these things that we should need to go out to the greater community for nationally? Or why aren't many of those things able to be covered by our own budget? Because many of them are pretty basic. And so how do we begin to look at, you know, I know we're doing the big things with the budget, but down to the classroom level, so that teachers actually feel they have access to the things that make teaching the joy it can be, without them having to sort of go and fundraise for the very basic things they need to run a classroom.
I don't think we have great data from Donors Choose or some of those other sites about what's actually happening, but I will say, you know, with some limited exceptions, you know, every year, hundreds of thousands of dollars of school non-personnel money goes unspent. We're also in a year where there's millions and millions of ESSER dollars. And the only thing I can guarantee for sure is that schools are still going to go on Donors Choose. And I know if I was a teacher still, if my school wasn't on Donors Choose, I'd figure out something to put on there, because there's always something next. And I think what we need to do, to your point, and Chair, you've always done such a good job of pointing us to this, is really define what every school needs to have to make sure we're providing that consistently. And then, you know what, like, let's go get that money. This is why I learned nothing from the superintendent, right? Let's go get that money from anybody who's willing to give it to us, right? Like, let's get all the money we can from the city, but if people are going to come give us money on Donors Choose, great. If foundations want to give us money, fantastic, as long as there aren't any strings attached. So, like, let's go get every dollar we can possibly get for the kids of Boston. Hope it's not going for crayons.
Yeah, but I guess, but my feeling often is when you read these things, it's poor, pitiful us. We've got the poorest children, we've got this, that, or the other. We've got one of the biggest budgets in the country, and so somewhere along the line, we're not sending the right message, either by virtue of how we do our budget or how people perceive the budget, that we are actually providing what students need, or for the teachers to have a different attitude about how they can go about getting what they need without having to play the poor card, literally.
And we're hoping that this is actually one of the things that all of you can help us do. Right now in our budget system, every school has one line for supplies, maybe two, because if they have one on the general fund and one on Title I, and it's just one line, supplies. And that's sort of the way our financial system works. That's the level of detail it gets to. What we're hoping to use all of you to do in the promise of the system is that you can literally go down and build your budget and say, first grade pencils, second grade pencils, third grade pencils, and it's like $40 for that, $40 for that, and really go in and document as a school, this is my entire budget spending plan at a really nuanced level. And that we can preserve that, because sometimes all that happens is the previous school leader made a plan for school supplies and they left, and the secretary left, and the new leader's starting and getting up to speed, and the new secretary starting and getting up to speed, and the teacher comes to school and no one's ordered the supplies yet. And it's just been overlooked and missed in the onboarding process. And so we need to have better systems and structures to catch those issues and to make sure the teachers are getting the supports and services they need. Because sometimes what's happening, too often what's happening is we actually have the money in the budget. It's there, but the supplies aren't getting to the teachers because of something along the process that has gotten broken.
I just want to make this super clear, because it's something that's often a place of misconception. When we say we do a budget collaborative, there's literally a step in the process where we check that every single school leader has budgeted enough for supplies for their building. The result is that we can say confidently that schools have resources. We hear about schools saying, oh, I don't have soap in the bathrooms, but we know that if that's the case, then there is a breakdown somewhere with a staff member not doing what they needed to, and not a funding issue. We do provide these resources. Now, if I were fundraising, oftentimes you go and fundraise for the things that are super tangible and things people want to pay for, like field trips or like materials, because you want to use your non-personnel dollars to do things that people, it's harder to explain and sell, like teacher stipends for professional development, or extra time for teachers to do planning together. Those are the things that schools are making the decisions, and we want to support that. But in a district of 121 schools and that many different budget decision makers, there's going to be people who are not being as sort of forthcoming about what they could have afforded if they made different trade-offs, because they're trying to get people to fundraise in that way. That sounds more cynical than it meant it to be. I didn't mean it to be that, but sort of like, but it's just part of what we see every year. I mean, we literally have school leaders sign off that says, I have enough in supplies in my budget for the next school year.
I've also got to say, I mean, I know my personal experience, we've been having budget cuts since the year 2000 in most schools across the nation. Like, we're pretty blessed here. We got one school complaining about their budget right now, and it's mostly less about their budget and more about the Build PPS promise that they're concerned about. So to not have, I mean, Jerry, Madam Chair, what these meetings were like. And if Mr. O'Neill was here, he would tell you what the budget meetings used to look like at these. And the fact that we are able to put $54 million into soft landings for schools so that they're not having to experience major cuts is pretty remarkable. It's not what's common across the rest of the nation at this point. They're spending all of their ESSER money on filling back the holes. And we've been blessed to be able to have this resource. This is an awesome budget. And
it absolutely is.
I just, I just want to say that again, that we are in a unique position to still be making major investments in our children's well-being and in their academic well-being, more so than any other district that I'm aware of right now. I've got colleagues of mine closing schools left and right because they
Yeah.
have to adjust for the enrollment decline across.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to reiterate that fact.
No, it is.
You're not, I mean, you could have 70 people here today from our schools.
Right. Yeah,
Very
and that's sort of what I'm worried about for next year when I look at that $54 million that we put in soft landings.
Well, you'll have a plan.
And I
though,
know it's pandemic, I know it's a number of things, but I know that, we need to really go and look carefully at that list of who got soft landings and why, and what are the conversations we truly need to be having as a district over this next year, so that next year, this time, there aren't 25 schools lined up to complain about the budget, because how many years can we put that kind of money into soft landings?
Yes, and we
Without doing
prioritized as a
it.
school committee because of the pandemic to have these soft landings, not to make these disruptive moves.
No, we absolutely.
During this really difficult and challenging time.
Right.
But at some point, once this study comes back, that's being done right now, the school committee is going to have to make some hard decisions around closures and mergers, because it's not sustainable, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
Because it's a cross subsidy. So when you when you overfund some schools, then the other schools don't get the quality guarantee.
Yeah. And so that's the piece that we have to look at collectively across all of our schools as we continue forward. So, Yes.
Yep. And so then you're gonna have to stick to it though. Like once you get the plan, then you have to stick to it, right?
That's going to be the hard piece, but we're all going to have to do that together, including all of the schools.
It's gonna have to
with
be
us.
leader proof, whether it's a new superintendent or new school committee, get a plan that the community owns. And that's gonna take a lot of vetting and a lot of engagement. And then they own that and they hold everybody accountable to it.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Any last questions before we sign off for the evening? All right, so I want to again thank all the members for all of their questions. And also I want to thank everyone who testified tonight. And I want to remind everyone that all of the budget documents are available online at bostonpublicschools.org/budget. You can also email your comments to budget@bostonpublicschools.org, as well as to the school committee. The next remote budget hearing will take place on Tuesday, March 1st at 5 p.m., at which time the committee will receive a budget presentation focused on the central budget. Our final remote budget hearing will take place on Wednesday, March 16th at 5 p.m. prior to the school committee meeting. The next regular school committee meeting will take place on Tuesday, not Wednesday of next week, Tuesday, February 15th at 5 p.m. If there is nothing further, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion? Thank you. Is there a second? Is there a
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cardet Hernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Lopera,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia,
Yes.
Mr. Tran, Mr. O'Neill, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you and good night.
Night.
Good night.